Right. I think we are ready to get going here. Before we officially kick off, does anybody have any last minute questions, concerns, comments, things that we need to address before the presentation? Nope, all good. Okay. Just a reminder to everybody who's a panelist, Zoom etiquette, if you're not speaking, please mute just so that we avoid any feedback. And I think we can get going. Awesome. All right. Well, let's begin. So first of all, welcome to everybody attending our think tank event today. This is the second in a 4-part series that Leggett Architects is putting on this fall. We are focusing today on the topic of housing stock and design alternatives. And we'll be talking about development and partnerships between architects, developers, urban planners, and ways to address housing inequalities in America. So the first thing that I want to do today is, as we welcome everybody here, is welcome our host, specifically Adam Quigley, who is an architect here in our Chicago studio. Adam has 20 years of experience in architectural planning and design. Since 2019, he's been a project architect at Leggett, focused on design implementation and detailing in the transportation and education markets. Prior to joining Leggett, Adam led many multidisciplinary design teams over a wide range of industries, including professional service, technology, government, education, and healthcare. He's planned and executed over 3 million square feet of office space, working closely with stakeholders to develop goals, align budgets and schedules, test assumptions, and rigorously translate ambitions into physical space. Adam is passionate about the craft of architecture and approaches all projects through research, spatial relationships, elegant detailing, and technical excellence. Adam holds a master's degree from the University of Michigan and an undergraduate degree in architecture from the University of Illinois at Chicago. Adam, welcome.
Thanks, Justin. So should we get started here?
Yep.
Great. So why Think Tank? Think Tank is an annual symposium put together by Leggett Architects. Each year we invite authorities from a variety of disciplines to speak about trends related to their areas of expertise, as well as how design impacts those fields. In recent years, the symposium has featured discussions about biophilic and sustainable design, health and welfare, school safety, urban sprawl, and many other timely topics. This year, we're partnering with the Chicago Architectural Biennial and the AIA Chicago. Today's conference will focus on reinvestment in affordable and multifamily housing. What is homecoming? Homecoming is the act of bringing the disinvested back to the table, with all the bittersweet realities that can entail. Reinvestment is the language of homecoming, not a physical return to a specific place, but a promise made by investors to communities and users that they matter, and that they are part of a legacy that will continue long after they're gone. I want to briefly acknowledge our partners and affiliates. Leggett Architects has generously supported the think tank since its inception, and we wouldn't be here today without their support. I also want to acknowledge the Chicago Architectural Biennial, now in its 4th iteration, and the 2nd time the biennial has partnered with us for our think tank program. So today's program will include a keynote lecture by Todd Rhoades, followed by a panel discussion from 3:15 to 4:45. For those of you who are AIA members, you can be earning 1 AIA learning unit for the keynote lecture, as well as a unit and a half for attending the panel. So let's get started. I'd like to introduce our keynote speaker, Todd Rhoades. Todd Rhoades received his bachelor's degree in architecture from Kansas State University in 1980, followed by a master's of architecture from Cranbrook Academy of Art. While working at the University of Minnesota Design Center for American Urban Landscape, Todd worked on his first affordable housing project, helping the city of Minneapolis resolve the Holman public housing lawsuit. He then went on to lead the Design Center's team efforts in East Grand Forks, Minnesota, when the city requested help in re-envisioning the city after the devastating floods of 1998. While at the Design Center, Todd opened his architectural firm, Rhoades Architects, in 1993 with his partner, Terry Cermak. The focus of the firm was to work with nonprofit organizations to bring good design to affordable housing projects of all scales and types. The firm designed projects totaling over 2,000 new dwelling units and 5,000 renovated units. Todd believes that good design enriches people's lives, and he applies his deep knowledge of design principles and building technology to each of his projects. He enjoys working at all scales of design, from building details to master plans for new communities. Todd's work has won numerous design awards, including 4 of the 7 AIA Minneapolis Ignite Affordable Housing Design Awards. He most recently his most recent award was for Higher Ground St. Paul, a homeless shelter and permanent housing facility, which is phase 1 of a larger campus for Catholic Charities of St. Paul in Minneapolis. Todd is a professor of practice at the University of Minnesota's School of Architecture, where he has taught both undergraduate and graduate design studios for the past 30 years. When not in the office, Todd enjoys the beauty and solitude found in the forests of northern Minnesota while paddling his wood and canvas canoe and hiking the numerous trails in the region. I like that too. So before we begin here are the learning objectives for Todd's presentation. Before we begin, here are the learning objectives for Todd's presentation as required by the AIA. If anybody has any questions for Todd, please ask them in the Q&A box, and we'll get to those at the end of the presentation. So with that, I'll turn it over to Mr. Rhoades.
Great, thanks, Adam. Do you happen to have the PowerPoint, Justin?
Justin, we can't hear you.
Sorry about that. Hi, Todd. Yeah, if you want to share your screen again, like we just did in the run up to this, you should be all set for that. So if you want to hit that little green button at the bottom that says share screen, if you have it up, we can go from there.
Okay, do you see that?
Yes, we do. Perfect. Looks great.
Okay, great. So first of all, I'd like to thank Nick Woodward for inviting me to speak today about our experience designing supportive housing. When I started considering the content of the presentation, I thought one strategy would be to talk briefly about several of our projects, but then I decided to present in more detail Dorothy Day Place, which is a mixed-use campus in St. Paul developed by Catholic Charities. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about design intentions, lessons learned, and questions unanswered. So first, a little bit about Catholic Charities and the amazing work they do in our region. It's a very large organization, and here's some data from 2019. And some key facts is that they nearly dealt with 23,000 direct service customers. They have dealt more than 1 million meals and snacks served, more than 540,000 nights of housing and shelter, nearly 600 employees, which is a big group, 16,000 donors, 110,000 volunteer hours, 5,000 community advocates, and a 2019 revenue of $52 million. Their strategies include direct service to those most in need, partnerships to solve poverty and create opportunity, public engagement, advocacy, racial equity, social justice, mitigate trauma of poverty, and then they deal mostly with individuals experiencing homelessness, children in need, older adults, and people with disabilities. To start off the presentation, I wanted to show you an image of the original Dorothy Day Center in St. Paul. And this center was built in the 1970s. It was never meant to be a drop-in center, but now it is a homeless shelter. With the ever-increasing homeless population and lack of shelter and housing options, the Dorothy Day Center became a temporary shelter. At some point, a tall fence was built around the courtyard to corral clients sitting outdoors, and to some, the fence made the facility look like a prison. This photo here is a typical night in the Dorothy Day Center with mats scattered over the floor for people to sleep. Just try to imagine, just try to imagine getting a peaceful and comfortable sleep with clients sleeping elbow to elbow on these thin plastic mats. This certainly is not a dignified way to treat others. I don't know about you, but this does not look like fun. In the morning, staff's confronted with trash, food, spilled drinks, and abandoned articles of clothing strewn over the floor. One of the staff members said, every morning it looks like cleaning up at the state fair. Here's an article literally just 2-3 weeks ago out of the Star Tribune in Minneapolis. No wonder it's hard to find a new home. The Twin Cities has the worst housing shortage in the nation. All of us are confronted with this dilemma, and all of us are also very prevalent of the 10 cities that go up where we live. This isn't just a problem in Seattle, San Francisco, or New York. It's happening everywhere. We desperately need more affordable housing today. Recognizing that the existing Dorothy Day Center was no longer needed, they decided to build a new facility, which is Dorothy Day Place. Here's an image, a rendering of the project a few years ago. And this is the largest public-private partnership in housing and social services in Minnesota state history. To the left, you see the Higher Ground St. Paul building. To the right, you see the St. Paul Opportunity Center and Dorothy Day residence. It's a very large project that, by the numbers, I'll show you the total public and private funding for the project. For total public funding, it was close to $54 million. Private funding was almost $30 million. Total funding from other sources was almost $27 million. And the total project was around $110 million. Big project. Some of the Dorothy Day Place innovations dealt with a pay-for-stay shelter where residents pay $7 per night to Catholic charity banks for permanent housing. Medical respite units for continued care for patients after being hospitalized. Units for women with severe alcohol and other substance use disorder. Programs like Housing First, Rush, Outside In. We provide veterans housing in a resource hub, on-site community clinic, and multiple collaborations. What were some of the ingredients for success on the project? First of all, Tim Marks. He's one of the most charismatic and compassionate leaders I've ever met. He's the former CEO of Catholic Charities, and he was a strong, compassionate leader who conveyed a clear vision of making Dorothy Day Place a state-of-the-art facility. We would often hear Tim say, we have an obligation to take care of the disadvantaged. The other thing about Tim you need to know is it's almost impossible to say no to him. And so he's one of those leaders that just makes you really follow his lead. The other thing we had was tremendous support from the mayor, city council, and business community in St. Paul. We had an influential fundraising team led by Doug Baker, CEO of Ecolab, Andrew Cesari, CEO of US Bank, and Mary Brainerd, former CEO of Health Partners, who were well connected to a network of major donors. We had experienced development partners who worked pro bono to help Catholic Charities navigate the development process. And lastly, we had a dedicated, experienced, and engaged Catholic Charities staff who worked and reworked the building program with us to make this a model facility. Before we started the project, we didn't have a site. So we looked at numerous sites around the city of St. Paul, trying to understand fit, location, what neighborhoods were opposed to the project. And this was a good opportunity for us to start to explore some ideas. At this time, Catholic Charities thought the Connection Center, which is social services, and the shelter and housing component should be at different sites. And the more we explored this, the more we thought, well, maybe we should try to find a site that would make a campus where we had services and housing and a shelter all in one location. What you see here in this final site selection in the triangular area is a site that's left over from a couple of things. One, the kind of the shift in the city grid between the downtown core and the adjacent neighborhoods adjacent to that, and the I-35 highway that cuts through downtown. We essentially have a leftover triangular site that other developers were hesitant to address. However, it's a great site because it's located at the edge of downtown and surrounded by some of St. Paul's most iconic landmarks. I'll talk in a minute about some of those landmarks, but you can see it's a goofy site. And we have numerous affordable housing projects on triangular sites very similar to this. And often we used to joke that you can find the worst sites of the city when you find the public housing projects and the strip malls. And this was not one of those locations, but it also is a very difficult site in terms of its configuration. When we blow into the site, you can see the phase one, the triangular parcel on the left of the screen. And there was an existing labor building there with a large parking lot surrounding it. Adjacent to that is a complex site that shows the existing Dorothy Day Center in green with its adjacent courtyard. To the left of that, there's a two-story 1920s funeral home that Catholic Charities was using for some offices and a drop-in shelter. Above that in red are privately owned parking lots because the Excel Center in downtown St. Paul has a number of parking lots, and these were privately owned that it was essentially a large cash cow for them. And there was almost a 85, 90-year-old machine shop business that you see as the private business there. And then to the right of the site is in purple is the city parking. And that's never been developed because of the high bedrock located in that location. And there are numerous utilities that run under the site. So we started the process looking at the labor building site. You see the shelter in yellow on the left of the screen. And then we started to literally explore what were some of the possibilities for the adjacent site next to it. Now, we didn't own a lot of the property there. We started to speculate what would happen if we started to develop that, ask the owners if they would be willing to sell. The next slide shows we looked at the opportunity of possibly closing Main Street and making a courtyard between the buildings. And at this time, the Connection Center was only a 2 or 3 story building, and they actually had a warehouse noted in the purple color there. And we decided that the warehouse could go off of site down out of the downtown location. The St. Paul Higher Ground building would have permanent housing above a shelter, and the Connection would provide social services for the project. And at this time, we were looking at possibly keeping the existing Dorothy Day Center that you see in that kind of teal green color. Next, we looked at keeping Main Street open, which we all thought was a very good idea, trying to expand the courtyard a little bit and making the Connection Center a little bit larger to provide more services for the project. And then the site the project that we finally decided was the most feasible for the project is this, what you see in the screen here, where we had Higher Ground St. Paul, which had a shelter service and also permanent housing. And then Connection Center, what you see in purple and red, would be social services for the project, and then more permanent housing that you see in yellow above. And this made a large campus that had both social services, temporary shelter housing, and permanent housing on the site. Now, one of the challenges here was that now that we liked this concept, Catholic Charities development team was given the task of negotiating with the adjacent landowners to sell their properties, which they did after several months of haggling. Now, I don't know if this is true or not, but I speculate that Tim Marks sprinkled some Catholic guilt over the negotiations by telling the landowners that this was the right and noble thing to do. Once again, it was hard to say no to Tim. And just a sequence here, you see to the right, the Catholic Charities properties, phase 2, demolishing everything, and then phase 2, the connection center with Dorothy Day Place above. This is what the campus looks like today. The building on the left is called Higher Ground St. Paul. The first 2 floors are shelter floors that you see articulated in brick, and then permanent SRO units above in the light colored metal and precast box. The entrance into the Higher Ground St. Paul is along Old Fish Street with the large stair tower that you see in front of the building. There's a skyway that connects 2 buildings together, and the building on the right is the Opportunity Center on the first 2 floors, and the 4 floors above is Dorothy Day Residence, and those are both efficiency units and SRO units for the project. The entrance for the housing, Dorothy Day Residence, is along the front of the street. Entrances into the Opportunity Center and into the shelter occur within the courtyard. Just to give you a magnitude of the size of the project, Higher Ground St. Paul has a total building area of 111,000 square feet. And that's on a site of a little less than 2 acres. We have a maximum capacity of 286 total shelter occupants, and the total SRO dwelling unit count is 193. At the Opportunity Center, we have a total building area of 171,000 square feet, a little bit more than 2 acres, and we have total number of units of 177, which includes both SRO and efficiency dwelling units. So when you add 370 total dwelling units plus 286 shelter beds, we have 656 total occupancy. I'd like to go through the plans now to give you an idea of what the uses are within the buildings. So this depicts the entire campus. Higher Ground St. Paul is on the left, and we have a welcoming lobby. We have a men's shelter. We have a women's shelter, the late stage alcohol wing, and then a courtyard in front of the building. At the Dorothy Day Place side, we have a lobby and waiting, which is even larger, that has both lockers and a service court associated with it, a large dining room that can seat 300, a commercial kitchen, medical and dental clinic at the lower corner of the building, and a social enterprise space on the right corner of the building. As you move up to the second floor, Higher Ground St. Paul has 60 pay-for-stay bunks, and these bunks are a little bit, provide more room than the shelter downstairs, staff offices, medical respite units, a computer lab, community rooms around a kitchen hub, and then the second floor actually projects from the building. We have green roofs there, and then we have an outdoor terrace that is right at the elbow of the L. The Opportunity Center has training rooms and computer room along the front of the building, partner offices, wellness, veterans, personal care, and meditation rooms. And all of these rooms look onto a second floor terrace. We have staff offices, break room, and a roof terrace for the staff at the corner of the building, mechanical room, and then a 2-story dining room, which you see with the X'd out upper level of the dining area. As we move up to the 3rd and 5th floors at Higher Ground St. Paul, we have 194 single room occupancy units, 2 shared lounges and kitchens. And here for the SRO units, we have shared bathrooms distributed throughout the plan, and we have some support staff offices. At the Dorothy Day Residence, we have 100 single room occupancy units, 77 efficiency units, 1 flex dwelling unit, 1 shared kitchen and TV lounge on each floor that is the seam between the two legs of the building, 3 shared bathrooms, community room, computer lab, some bicycle storage on the 3rd floor, community room on the 3rd floor, and then the upper floors is just dwelling units. I won't go through all the colors on this diagram, but this diagram kind of illustrates the complexity of the program and just all the various spaces we have within the project. And as architects, it was kind of difficult trying to figure out how to create order and some kind of semblance of order within the overall composition of the project. I'd like to talk a little bit about the courtyard. because that's such a significant component of the project. When you look at number one, I talked a little bit earlier about potentially arranging parallel buildings along Main Street. And quite early in the process, we didn't think that was a very good solution. We wanted to make a public gesture to the city of St. Paul. So we opened up the courtyard where both folks who live and work in St. Paul have the opportunity to use the courtyard, as well as the people that occupy the Dorothy Day Place. On number three, what we tried to do is carve out the first level of the building as a continuation of the exterior space. We have large expanses of glass between inside and outside to let our clients be able to see inside of the building so that they become familiar with the building from the outside. And it also allows our staff to see from the inside and outside to control activity in the courtyard. To bridge across Main Street, we provided a grove of trees and visual access to the two entrances of the buildings. And then number five, we created a variety of outdoor rooms rather than just having a large monolithic courtyard. And then six, we located furniture. We have retaining walls, we have benches, we have tables with chairs. And the one thing, unfortunately, we don't have are movable chairs in the courtyard. And that's something as a team, we're advocating for. It came out of the budget as a VE item at the end of the project. But we want to program some of the outdoor spaces now that COVID is hopefully soon over, and the movable furniture will be very advantageous for outdoor activities when we have concerts and small activities where people can gather and make smaller social gathering areas. Here's a view of the courtyard, a rendering that we had done earlier. And here you can see we have green roofs on the second floor and third floor of the building, where the lower levels are actually extended out into the courtyard. So it creates a kind of a three-dimensional courtyard. The little diagram on the right shows the housing floors looking over the roofs that project from out underneath of the building, and provides a nice visual transition from the upper floors down to the lower courtyard level. The other thing that we explored on the outside of the campus, there's an existing Assumption Church, which was the original, about 100 years ago, the original Dorothy Day drop-in center. And so we liked the verticality of the spires of the church and incorporated that verticality both at the Dorothy Day residence and at the higher ground St. Paul building. So this verticality articulation of the entrances around the site, marking where people can orient themselves and go into the project. Now I'd like to specifically talk about higher ground St. Paul, and then later I'll talk about the Dorothy Day residence and the Opportunity Center. But some of the design concepts that we looked at for higher ground St. Paul, you can see on the left that goofy triangular site in red, but we had to establish a view corridor up to the state capitol. We also, close in proximity is the History Center, literally right next across the highway from our site, views to the St. Paul Cathedral, which is a very, very important landmark to the city. And then we also wanted to reinforce this green corridor from our site, from the History Center, our site, all the way down to the Mississippi River. We recognize that our site is also at the edge of downtown and literally part of the gateway into the downtown area. As you can see, we're right adjacent to the central business district, so it's a very prominent site within the city of St. Paul. Some of the design concepts we incorporated in the project were, for the building specifically itself, we're stabilizing the hill with a solid brick foundation that carves out space for the shelter. You can see that on the diagram there. Marking place with vertical stair tower that signifies entry and becomes a beacon of light at night. Gesturing towards downtown with the angled placement of the spacious entry canopy, layering the light-colored permanent housing floors above the brick base to create a prospect with views to downtown, the Capitol, and the cathedral, and enhancing the public realm with an alley of trees lining the sidewalk that links the nearby History Center to the Mississippi River. Now, any of you who have been to St. Paul in the spring know that that's when the high school hockey tournament occurs. A lot of folks park up near the History Center, walk by our site to get to the Excel Center, which is across the street from our site. And there's just a flurry of activity at that downtown location at that time. So our site is a very exposed site to the public coming to the Excel Center and coming to activities in downtown St. Paul. Here's a view of the finished project, the entrance into the higher ground St. Paul. And we were excited about this idea of elevating lives from the ground up. So the building literally is a step up out of poverty. The stair at the front of the building was a literal and metaphoric symbol of moving up out of poverty to the permanent housing dwelling units on levels 3, 4, and 5. The permanent housing is elevated above the shelter base as a prospect over the city of St. Paul. Once again, this talks about this elevation, and it's highly articulated by this large precast and sheet metal box that you see that sits above the brick base of the building. This night view also highlights that design concept. The shelter entrance of higher ground St. Paul is located on the courtyard side of the building. It is the shelter entrance for men and women. We researched a few homeless shelter precedents in the country that had separate courtyards and entrances for men and women, but we decided that everyone should enter the same door based on the public nature of our courtyard and the image we wanted to portray to the public. The shelter floors of the building project outward from the base of the building to break down the scale of the 5-story building beyond into smaller components. The entry canopy provides a protected area from rain and snow for clients waiting for the shelter to open. Large expanses of glass, as I mentioned before, are found on the first floor to allow clients to see into the facility and for staff to survey activity in the courtyard. I like the quote by Jamie in the corner of the slide, "Being at higher ground makes it possible for me to dream again." Now, what's important about that is that most homeless folks living on the street are living day to day, and their entire life is a 24-hour cycle. So once you do have permanent housing, it gives you the opportunity to start to think about job opportunities, education, and other opportunities you would like to explore in life. So a shelter and permanent housing is the first step to getting your life back in order. Here's a view of the higher ground St. Paul from the northeast corner, looking down into the courtyard. And luckily the site slopes a little bit, so we could carve out the courtyard to provide kind of a buffer between the courtyard and the sidewalk and Main Street. And it provides kind of a nice little enclosure for the court. Some of the building solutions we incorporated into the project for higher ground St. Paul, excuse me. We did build this building out of precast concrete, and that structure allowed us to literally enclose the building in 4 months. And the thermal encapsulated precast panels allow us a thermal envelope, exterior finish, and interior surface for the project. It was a very durable finish. We did provide a snow melt system for both courtyards across the street and for higher ground St. Paul, which provides a really safe and snow-free outdoor space. So in the winter when it snows, and which it does quite a bit in Minnesota, we have a nice dry surface. And this also lessens the maintenance of the building by reducing the amount of salt, snow, and grit that enters the project. We talked a little bit about green roofs, and we use silva cells to ensure a healthy tree canopy. So that supports the structured soil and provides a great stormwater treatment opportunity on the site. And then to be respectful of all neighbors, we have bird-safe glass where collisions were most probable. We use district energy on the project to complement the citywide environmental initiatives, and it also lowers our future maintenance costs for the project. This is entering into the men's and women's shelter. Excuse me. The lobby is an open space with visual connections to the men's shelter, women's late-stage alcoholic wing, and the stairs leading up to the pay-for-stay housing. One of our clients remarked that the maple wood ceiling is like a natural warm blanket over the public space. The commissioned mural by In Plain Sight Art in Minneapolis, that you see on the left of the screen, was a collage of images depicting the history of Catholic charities in St. Paul. The mural is composed of graphics and photos heat infused onto ceramic tiles, which is virtually indestructible. The mural is a visual focal point for the clients to enjoy when visiting the lobby. I also like David's quote here, "I'm not hopeless. I know I can get up again from here, and I will." That whole notion of hope is also very important for the homeless, trying to get their feet back on the ground, and once again, thinking about the future. This is an interesting detail I wanted to add and share with you about the project, but the staff at Catholic Charities wanted us to be aware that sometimes altercations do occur in the building. And at their staff desk, they wanted 2 means of escape if those altercations occur. So each of the staff desks have 2 means of egress for staff if something does occur. Entering into the men's shelter, you can see the wide open space, and you see the locker design on the right and the shelter to the left. The bunk design incorporates a solid metal privacy screen at the lower portion of the bed and a perforated screen above so staff can see through the bunk for observation of the room. Every bunk is provided with a locker and a personal outlet for plugging in computers, cell phones, and other devices, which most clients have. This small detail of having personal outlets dramatically reduces fights among clients. We also provided a few extra long bunks for tall clients like me who need extra room to stretch out. Acoustical ceilings tight to the structure ensures a quiet sleeping environment. Another view of the shelter showing the transparency between the inside and outside. And we do have automatic roller shades that come down in the evening when the clients go to sleep. I would be remiss if I didn't discuss smoking. We spent hours and hours discussing how to deal with this issue, and it is not entirely resolved. And I'm not sure there's an acceptable solution if you have smoking in the building. Smoking is an unhealthy, dirty, and addicting habit. Many homeless want to quit, but they're surrounded by smokers who are so it makes it very difficult to achieve this goal. A Harvard report says that 3/4 of homeless people smoke at a rate that's 4 times higher than the general population. And many homeless people also continue to smoke as a way to reduce stress and boredom and to cope with depression and other mental illnesses. Some smokers are said to be able to obtain cigarettes and give them a sense of hope and self-worth. And cigarettes do have a positive aspect that it does offer clients the opportunity to share experiences, go out to the smoking room, share a cigarette, and it is kind of an icebreaker for one client to meet another. But it is a very unhealthy habit, and you can see the photograph of the guy on the right who's taking cigarettes he's found on the street and mixing them to make a larger cigarette. I won't show you all the smoking rooms in the building, but this is how we dealt with it in the men's shelter. That the diagram on the right shows their surveillance from the staff desk, seeing through the bunks to the smoking room in the distance. And you can see on the image on the left corner, right in the distance, you can see that opening of the vestibule out into the smoking room. And it's an open air room, which is actually quite pleasant space. It's actually one of my favorite spaces of the project. But it is open only to the sky, and it's a very, very simple, calm space where the clients can come outside and smoke together. On this slide, as you look at the right of the slide, you can see the lobby in the distance, and then you walk up some stairs to get to the pay for stay shelter. So all the pay for stay clients come in the shelter entrance and then go up to the second floor. One of the challenges of the project, however, was the existing slope of the site, which required the permanent housing entry to be located a half a level below the housing entry. To address this, we provided sight lines from the staff desk down to the entry level where the stair and elevator lobby is located. And the building is literally divided by this wall where this is the permanent housing lobby and this is the shelter lobby adjacent to that. And this glass wall that you see below allows filter light into the shelter, but it is a locked door and only used for emergencies. The housing lobby that you see in the diagram to the right, you come up these stairs, you're in the lobby, the two red U's are the staff desk, and you're in the lobby, and you have the opportunity to see into the community room that you see through these doors here, the computer room, or the opportunity to sit in the lobby, and then that's where we have the resident mailboxes along the wall. In all of the community spaces, we incorporated large areas of glass to allow both residents and staff to see activities occurring in those spaces, and it allows them to ask the question, would they like to participate or not? And then you can see the circle in this diagram here, that all the public spaces are kind of circling around a central kitchen hub. So that kitchen actually serves the community room next to the lobby, it serves an outdoor terrace, and it serves the pay-for-stay lounge just on the opposite side of the terrace. And so this provides a great opportunity for each of the spaces to communicate from one to the other and allow residents and staff to see one space to the other. And then this is the outdoor terrace adjacent to the community room. And you can see it's a great prospect over the courtyard and great views to downtown St. Paul. As you proceed into the pay-for-stay shelter, we've created on the right side, on the image on the left, you can see that we've organized the space with half walls that create smaller rooms with 12 to 16 bunks each. Bunk beds are freestanding and each resident is offered a full-size locker, unlike downstairs where we had just small lockers on the bunks. To the left of the corridor is the staff desk, computer room, TV lounge, and a smoking room at the end of the hallway. Here also you see how we've incorporated a wooden ceiling over the circulation path to give warmth to the space. Then talking about some of the common rooms we have at Higher Ground St. Paul, this is the community room that's located at the intersection of the two legs of the L. And in the diagram in the right corner, you can see a series of red angles that point to strategic landmarks around the site. In the photograph on the right, you see a view up to the St. Paul Cathedral. Photograph on the left, you can see outside down towards the Excel Center. And between the Excel Center and the apartment building, you literally get a glimpse down to the Mississippi River. The next photo is the same space. And as you turn around, we have a connection to the common kitchen that serves the space where clients have the opportunity to cook meals for themselves and their peers. And then we have a lower window when you're sitting down at the table next to the orange wall there, you have a great view out to the Minneapolis state capitol. Next, I'd like to talk a little bit about the progression of dwelling units. All of the dwelling units in Higher Ground St. Paul are either shelter unit bunks or we have SRO units, and at Dorothy Day Residence, we go into SROs and efficiencies. But if you look at this diagram, the bunk has roughly 15 square feet allocated per client. We move up to pay for stay where we have separated bunks and a larger locker attributed to that space. And we have around 30 square feet. A pod at Higher Ground St. Paul does not have a kitchen, but it's an enclosed, very safe space, which is around 120 square feet. And we have an SRO that's 190 square feet. And then going across the street to Dorothy Day Residence, we have SROs that are 300 square feet, and then efficiency apartments that are around 480 square feet apiece. And looking at Eddie's quote at the bottom of the page here, I'm proud that I'm off the floor. I have a bed. I came here to find independence and I found it. And that independence as you live in the Dorothy Day campus can go anywhere from a 15 square foot bunk all the way up to a permanent 480 square foot efficiency apartment. And that progression is something that's very, very positive at the facility. To illustrate this in photographs, I took 4 of those units, and the shelter on the right you can see is in the higher ground shelter space. And here's an attached bunk with beds and a small locker for each of the bunk beds. You progress up to pay for stay, you have a single bed with a full-size locker and a little bit more space. The bunks are no longer attached. And then you can move to the single room occupancy with a private kitchenette and shared bathrooms, all the way to the efficiency apartment with a private kitchen and bathroom. So this progression, once again, visually is quite compelling. One of the things that we did at Higher Ground St. Paul is we asked the question, how can we personalize the units in this really large building? And so the solution we came up with is that we incorporated natural birch doors to each of the dwelling units. And each door, the sapwood and the heartwood, is very different. So there's a significant graining difference for each of the resident entrances. And you can see one of those in the image on the left. And this is a great way to personalize the space, add some natural materials, and residents can identify their door through the graining of the door rather than through the number on the sign adjacent to their entrance. One of the cost-saving strategies I do want to point out in the project, Higher Ground Minneapolis was the shelter we did for Catholic Charities several years ago, and we didn't have any ceilings in the corridors as the cost-saving strategy. We did want ceilings in this project, but we realized that about our 75% set that we needed to cut some costs. So by removing the ceilings and reducing the height of the building about 1.5 feet per floor, we got back within budget. So we left the ceilings exposed, and your eye kind of travels downward, and the exposed ceiling is not that much of a deterrent within the experience of the space. We also organized parallel lights in the space, so as you visually look down the corridor, you're seeing the light fixtures and not the utilities above the lights marching down the hallway. The other thing that was a good asset to the project and an amenity is that we opened up the end of the corridors so natural light bounces down the corridors and provides daylight within the corridor space, so it's not a dark and closed space that is often seen in housing projects. Next, I'd like to talk a little bit about the composition of the 2 buildings. So once again, this is an outside view of the Dorothy Day campus. And at Higher Ground St. Paul, the building on the left, you see the light-colored box hovering above the dark brick base. At the Opportunity Center of the building on the right, the light-colored expression is located at the base of the building and the brick located on the upper floors. This creates a reversal of light to dark in the 2 buildings as seen in the diagram in the lower right corner. One building is about the sky and the other about the ground. You can visually see this and experience this reversal with your body as you descend down into the city. We also delineated a horizontal window expression for Higher Ground St. Paul to emphasize moving into downtown and a staccato rhythm of windows for the Dorothy Day residents to create a feeling of repose once you have arrived. We enjoyed exploring the similarities and differences between the 2 buildings while striving for a cohesive campus that has a variety of visual experiences. The next, I'd like to focus our attention on the Opportunity Center and Dorothy Day residents. The dark brick facade recalls the historic brick buildings found in downtown St. Paul, and this expression delineates the public front of the campus. To differentiate the 2 wings of the T-shaped building, we used a gray, tan, and orange cement panel rain screen for the north leg of the T of the building. We planned for a social enterprise space such as a coffee shop, cafe, or bakery on the southeast corner of the building that you see under the canopy here, but we couldn't secure a tenant. This was very, very disappointing. However, in 2 of our Twin Cities supportive housing projects for young adults transitioning out of foster care, we included first floor social enterprise spaces, and they had been very successful. At one location is a bakery and at the other a cafe. Several of the young adults living in these buildings have received job training in the restaurants, and the neighborhood enjoys having a place to buy coffee, sandwiches, cookies, and muffins. Social enterprise spaces and affordable housing projects can break down myths, stigmas, and barriers between people. We asked the question, can we provide moments to celebrate the individual within the larger composition of the building? We explored this idea with narrow vertical bay window that cantilevers out between two flanking brick walls at the main housing stair. The light coming through this window illuminates the stair enclosure, but it's only wide enough to comfortably fit one person. Being by yourself in this glass box, perched above the city with views toward downtown and the Mississippi River, is a satisfying individual moment where you feel connected to your surroundings. We often just think of affordable housing as the dwelling unit, but affordable housing is also making and connecting the building to its surroundings. You want to feel like you're part of the larger city. And so this individual moment was one of those ideas we had. How do we connect people to the larger context of St. Paul? The diagram of the left kind of illustrates the concept probably best. As you ascend up the city, you can stand in this cantilever balcony and you feel like you're under the canopy of the clouds, and you're looking over the trees and looking into some of the great views that you find in this area. And some of the other diagrams talk about the little cantilevered glass box, the individual approaching the cantilevered window, and then that glass box, the seam between the two brick halves. We sometimes use the analogy of a familiar single-family home that we find in the Twin Cities when talking to our clients about design intentions in our buildings. At the Opportunity Center, we describe the community dining room as the living room of the project with a large picture window overlooking the courtyard. Here's a view of the courtyard side of the building with dining room anchoring the center of the site. The large dining community room window provides transparency between the inside and outside of the building, and at night, interior lights fan out over the courtyard. This is a view of the Opportunity Center lobby. To the right is the central stair and atrium opening up to the second floor, where social services and client amenities are located. A maple wood handrail is provided on the stair to engage a warm touch of the hand. Just beyond the stair, under the wood railing, are lockers, showers, and services. Beyond that is the dining room. We toned down the brightness of the service area with dark blue tile walls and wood ceiling, so this area feels like another room within the larger lobby. Here's a detail of the central showers. The dark blue tile that wrapped the back of the lobby service area continues into the dining room and frames the serving line. Catholic Charities offices are located on the second floor. You see that ribbon of windows, and get borrowed light from the larger windows facing the courtyard. When sitting at your desk on the second floor, you can't see the tables in the dining room, but you do see the tree cover outside. This is a view of the serving counter, which is intentionally open so volunteers can interact with clients receiving meals. My partner, Terry Cermak, and I often serve dinner at Higher Ground, Minneapolis, which is the precursor to Dorothy Day Place. One evening when serving there, a guy came up to me after the meal and said, "I want to thank you for the great tacos tonight, but more importantly, I want to thank you for looking me in the eye when we talked earlier. You won't believe how many people don't do this." This encounter made me think about how often we treat the homeless as invisible and don't realize they are just like us. Catholic Charities hired an artist to paint welcome in several different languages on the stair risers, which you see when entering the building. Here you see that on the atrium stair on the right side of the screen, and then entering the second floor on the image on the left. Coming upstairs, this is the view of the intake and consultation rooms on the second floor. And just to the right, you can see the handrail that looks down into the atrium. Between the small intake and consultation rooms in yellow are the training room entrances. And at the end of this corridor, you see the entrance into the skyway that links the two buildings together. The seam between the two wings of the building is a common space with large windows facing the courtyard in downtown St. Paul. It's seen in the diagram on the right. And you can see the large windows between the two legs of the building. Large windows in common kitchen and lounge encourage residents and staff to socialize with others and be connected to the city. The diagram to the right shows that transparency that we achieved at that transition between the two legs of the project. And this is a view of the communal kitchen. And I included this because this is one of my favorite spots, sitting at the table, just looking at the view of downtown. The training and boardroom, located on the second floor of the building, has large expansive glass that looks down onto the street and into the Excel Center beyond. The second floor, roof terraces on the second floor provide an outdoor terrace. Once again, I talked about that earlier with the progression of the courtyard space. And here you can see across the street to the terrace at the higher ground St. Paul level. This is the wellness room in the project. And here you can see above the kitchen cabinets, we had salvaged some cast iron angels that we placed in the cornice above the cabinets and the linkage to the outdoor terrace beyond. Just a couple more slides, I'm just about done. And this is a view of the cast iron angels that we used above the kitchen cabinets. This is a view of the quiet room. Once again, has an access to the outdoor terrace beyond. A picture of the dwelling units and how we carved out space for the small kitchenette. And the best part of this slide is, I love it. This is mine. I know exactly where my cereal boxes are going to go. That's a quote from Warren. In our efficiency apartment. And the last slide is how we treated the enclosure of the bathroom and the open closet. We have a single sliding birch door, once again, that can either be in the open or closed position. So if we were to do this again, what would we do differently? Catholic Charities is very proud of what they've accomplished at Dorothy Day Place, but they would try and build another facility, but would they try to build another facility of this size in the future? Probably not. Tim Marks at Catholic Charities thinks the model of the future are smaller scale projects like Simpson Housing, which is a shelter, permanent housing facility we're designing that will receive only 70 to 80 shelter residents. Simpson's experience has shown that about 70 units is the optimal size for providing the best personal care and rapport between staff and residents. In addition, providing shelter and permanent housing in one facility is a great model for success. In conclusion, Catholic Charities has developed a remarkable project that provides hope and dignity for hundreds of people. But as Tim Marks says, our work is not finished. Thank you.
Thanks, Todd. And thanks for sharing this inspirational and groundbreaking project. We do have a number of questions for you. So I'm just going to start out here and see if you can answer some of them. Earlier, you shared some party diagrams showing the vast outdoor spaces in between the parallel buildings. How big of a focus was sustainability and energy savings when designing this project? Was biophilic design a consideration, or access to nature?
Access to nature was very, very prevalent in our conversations. That's why we have the open courtyard and provided vegetation on the courtyard level and also on the upper levels of the terraces. And the project, since it received public funding, had to conform to the B3 program, which is the most strict environmental program in the state of Minnesota. And we just received an award for our environmental initiatives on Higher Ground St. Paul. So it's a very environmentally friendly building, and access to nature was probably one of the key design concepts we utilized throughout the project.
Great, thanks. So another question, can you talk about the challenges involved? Can you talk about the challenges involved with creating a coalition of people invested in the Dorothy Day project? What was your role as the architect in herding these people over the finish line? And so
I would say that our role was one as a team member, and the entire leadership of this came literally through Tim Marks. And we were one of the team members that presented ideas, concepts to the larger business community of St. Paul, talked to the what was then part of the city of St. Paul, would call the Design Center St. Paul. We work very closely with them, trying to match their design concepts for what precincts are in the city. And luckily, we did have, as I mentioned earlier, we had a mayor, we had a business community that was very supportive of the project in the beginning. We've had several supportive housing projects that we started in neighborhoods that have ended up somewhere else because of neighborhood opposition, because city councils didn't want them, because of any number of reasons that people don't want affordable housing in their neighborhoods. So luckily, this project had support from the beginning, and Catholic Charities. We had accomplished Higher Ground St. Minneapolis a few years before this, so it also enabled people to visit that facility, see the type of facility it can be, look at how well it's maintained, and that precedent became very important in terms of selling this project to St. Paul. But I will say it's a huge challenge, yes. And luckily, we did have a large team to support the project from the beginning.
great, thanks.
I can't tell you how many meetings I've been to. I've been screamed at, and we don't want you in our neighborhood. We don't want even close to anything
Right.
resembling a homeless shelter where we live. So yes.
Sure, it's certainly challenging. So the Dorothy Day Place is obviously a highly designed project. When it comes to charitable or low-income housing projects, design is not often a high priority. How did you maneuver this project past these stereotypes and develop it while keeping design as a priority?
I'll say just in general that we've done a lot of supportive housing projects. And when Terry and I got into this business, there were a lot of affordable housing projects that were just about bottom line cost. And so we worked with clients, talked to them about the value of design, show them material choices that can make a better commitment to not only the neighborhood, reducing stigma, and making the building fit into the larger context. And that comes back to the point I was saying before, that affordable housing to be successful has to fit into a neighborhood. And if you're the cheapest building in the neighborhood, you're never going to be accepted. So we talked about these ideas, showed them some examples. And then as our business grew, we had more and more precedents that people could visit. We've gone on numerous bus tours with clients, showing them our projects. We've had people even call up our office, how do we move into this building? We said, well, you make too much money. And so it's really rewarding when people don't recognize this as affordable housing. They think it's market rate. And so we now have a number of clients that value design, value how affordable housing has an obligation to fit into the surrounding neighborhoods. And so that's all kind of worked in our favor in terms of getting people to understand that design is very important to the project. Regardless of who you are and regardless of your income, design is important. And that's something that Terry and I have stressed throughout our career, and the staff that works with us.
Great, thanks. So here's a specific question about the smokers' courtyard.
Okay.
It seems like a good way to honor the dignity of unhoused people while still separating them from the main building. Did the inclusion of this area affect the building's green certifications like LEED or WELL? How did the city's plan reviewers feel about this area?
That's a good question. The shelter kind of falls between cracks. And so everybody we talked to, the health department, the city, talking about issues of wellness, everything kind of revolved around, ideally we would have a smoke-free building. But when we're dealing with the shelter population, we didn't want to draw that line too sharply because many of the clients wouldn't come into the shelter if they couldn't smoke. We had an indoor smoking room at Higher Ground, Minneapolis that was painted an off-white that now is brown from all the nicotine and the smoke. So this facility wanted an outdoor room. And so Catholic Charities is slowly moving toward a smoke-free building. And as I stated before, this is not an easy topic. We talked endlessly about this. We'd come up with a solution, come up with another solution. The next meeting, no, let's make it all smoke-free. The next meeting, no, we can't. So if anybody has some great suggestions on how we can make a smoke-free world, we're certainly welcome to your suggestions. Yeah.
Okay, thanks. The questions are pouring in here. Housing as a physical function is a shelter that is designed with physical building quality, while housing as a social function is reviewed based on the inhabitants' behavior, both individually and socially, with its environment. How do you emphasize on this difference in the project? What was your observation related to the personalization of space in the public or private setting after seeing the building in actual use after opening?
Well, it's an interesting question because the building is dynamic and the building changes relative to the population in there. And so Catholic Charities has seen that depending upon who's living on each floor, different social groups occur, different interactions with common spaces. They can decorate, they can add artwork, they can do certain things to it. And one of the things they found, which is not, a surprise to anybody, but the women's floors are more interactive and socially engaged than the men. And so that's something that they've realized. Catholic Charities has a lot of programs, and you saw a lot of volunteers that come to the facility and volunteer. For example, their art classes and their classes on business, their classes on financing. And so there are opportunities for people to come in, engage the residents, and then they can personalize their space relative to things they make. And also we do have opportunities for them to display things in the public spaces. One of the challenges at Dorothy Day Place, it's a very, very large facility. And Catholic Charity staff is limited. And so there are more rules and regulations at this facility than we're experiencing at the Simpson housing facility we're doing in Minneapolis that's smaller. One example, all of the dining room utensils at Higher Ground in St. Paul are plastic because they don't want people stabbing each other and stealing them. All of the utensils used at Simpson facility in Minneapolis are metal, and they have no issue with using metal and people stealing them. And so it's a smaller facility. You get a little bit more interaction between staff and residents. All the staff at the Simpson facility in Minneapolis pride themselves on being able to memorize 80 names or 70 names of the clients who live there and in the shelters. And so it's a different dynamic. I kind of concluded with that statement that Higher Ground Dorothy Day campus is a large facility, and there's still, the other thing, it just opened right before COVID. So they still don't even have a very clear rhythm of how the building will operate, how the staff and the clients work together. And just one side note, I know we have other questions. The building was completed. We had uprisings in Minneapolis over George Floyd. An arsonist torched the building across the street from Dorothy Day Place, just completed. The heat was so intense, it melted the metal panels, broke glass. So we had to come back and refinish the building. So the trauma of the building, the trauma of COVID, getting a rhythm in the building is still being established. So a lot of issues. Unfortunately, I didn't answer your question very clearly, but it's still a work in progress.
Sure. And I think you talked about this a little bit previously, but have you had to deal with any negative assumptions, stereotypes, or attitudes about housing projects like this that were began or were created after the failed Pruitt-Digo in St. Louis? If so, how did you deal with these?
We haven't dealt with any buildings projects that large, but many of the issues that we dealt, that architects and the design community dealt with in the 1960s are prevalent in a lot of the rehab housing projects we do in the Twin Cities. So for example, I was introduced into affordable housing through the Holman consent decree in Minneapolis, and that was a $100 million lawsuit by the residents of a public housing project against the city of Minneapolis. And I was at the design center. We helped both the plaintiffs and defendants understand the physical issues of this. They tore the project down based on that evidence. The residents of the public housing authority, or the residents of the public housing, won the lawsuit, $100 million. They've raised the project. New housing has been built there. Other projects that we've dealt with have those same planning concepts, and we've had to rework those planning concepts so that they're more conventional and safer for the residents who live there.
Great. So you talked a little bit about issues around the George Floyd incident, and one of the questions is about vandalism in the center and how you've planned or mitigated against that.
We didn't have any graffiti directly on this building. Some other buildings we've designed had graffiti on them around the city. So this building didn't have graffiti, but it was certainly damaged through the heat of the fire adjacent to it. One of the things we did also is that we actually fenced off the courtyards during COVID to allow limited access into the interior. So that helped solve some of the vandalism problems, if there were any in that space. Catholic Charities does have a good staff to police the courtyard and the outside of the building, but there haven't been many noticeable issues of vandalism at Dorothy Day Place.
So piggybacking on that, what security measures?
I will say one other thing about vandalism though. In the 1960s, we renovated a project that was for Native Americans in Minneapolis years ago. And what was interesting, all the parking lots were being vandalized, cars were getting broken into, but none of the dwelling units looked into the parking lot. So no one saw any activity there. So one of our strategies was to add more windows to the units so they could see the parking lot. But before they did that, one of the strategies was to add more lights in the parking lot to deter criminals. And more light just allowed criminals to see better into the car, so the crime rate actually increased. So there is a correlation between physical design and crime, being able to survey a situation and being able for folks to understand the territory of the building and understand many of the principles that Oscar Newman had about defensible space back in the 60s.
Great, thanks. So piggybacking on that, what security measures were implemented to protect staff, visitors, clients to the building itself and its contents?
During COVID or just in general? Just in general.
Just in general, I think. Yeah.
Oh, just in general, I talked a little bit about the staff desk, but in general, the staff deal with this. So they're trained to deal with unruly clients. And the staff takes great pride in creating a rapport with the client. So it's not an us versus them situation. They're literally trying to set up a community of people that are, dwelling in the building, whether they be staff and or clients. And they go to great measures to do this. Wendy, who was very active as a Catholic Charities staff member, speaks fluent Spanish, and she often talks that she tries to hire folks that speak other languages to break down those barriers between the clients and the staff that work there. And I can't tell you of a more compassionate staff than Catholic Charities. I mean, they're very, very, very much into the needs of their clients and making this a dignified place to live.
Great, thanks. I'm just gonna hit a couple other questions here. We're gonna end at 3:20, so we can take a short break. Do you feel the new accessory dwelling unit zoning change in the Twin Cities will have an impact on relieving homelessness in that area?
That's a very difficult question. That's a policy question. I really don't, I'm kind of in the mix of trying to understand that myself to give a very good answer to. I do know, regardless of whatever we do, we need housing now, and we don't have enough policies in place. We work the developers. We've got projects with that are shovel ready. We just need money, you know, regardless of the strategy, regardless of our policing policy, regardless of our housing initiatives, we just need money and we need to get going. This crisis is escalating every day and it's totally out of control, and it's just not sustainable. It's just tragic, So sorry I didn't answer your question, but that's a very difficult question, and we could have a glass of wine and talk about this later.
Sure. Okay, so why don't we end it there? Again, thank you very much, Todd. Great presentation, very informative. We're going to be taking a 15-minute intermission. So go to the bathroom, get a drink, get a snack, and we'll return at 3:30. And when we resume, we'll be moving on to our panel discussion, which will take place right here in this Zoom window. So you can leave it open. All right. Thanks a lot, and I'll see you in 15. Okay, welcome back. This is can anybody hear me okay? Great. Welcome back to Think Tank 2021, Housing Stock and Design Alternatives. Next up, we have the panel discussion, and you'll be able to get 1.5 AIA learning units for those of you who are AIA members. Before we begin, here are the learning objectives for the panel discussion as required by the AIA. So now I'd like to introduce our panelists. Todd Rhoades will be sitting in on the panel. I think we're all familiar with him right now. In addition to that, we have Kevin Zepernick as Principal and Chief Executive Officer of Thrive Companies. Kevin plays a strategic role in the organization's direction while overseeing all aspects of day-to-day operations. Since early 2018, he has focused his time and energy on restructuring all aspects of execution to support Thrive's repositioning as an experienced brand. Prior to helping launch Thrive, Kevin operated the Zepernick Company, through which he worked with 3 of the largest home builders in the country, as well as the largest real estate service company in the world, Jones Lang LaSalle. He has developed over 2,000 residential acres and built more than 3,000 homes with a market value of just under $1 billion. As a contracted global project lead for Jones Lang LaSalle, he managed more than $1 billion in corporate real estate projects all over the world for some of JLL's largest clients. Kevin holds a degree in politics from Princeton University. So thanks for joining us, Kevin. Next, we've got David Block. David Block is Director of Development and has been Director of Affordable Housing for Evergreen Real Estate Group. He is an architect and urban planner and has been involved in community development and affordable housing for more than 25 years. He has led design, development, and construction of more than 2,000 units of mixed income housing, including such nationally recognized projects as the Independence and Northtown Library Apartments project, the St. Charles Hospital redevelopment in Aurora, the Ravenswood Hospital redevelopment in Chicago, and numerous other projects in 8 states. Prior to joining Evergreen, David spent 12 years at the Community Builders, a national nonprofit organization where he was Director of Development for Illinois, Indiana, Michigan, and Wisconsin. David managed 3 significant public housing transformation engagements in Hartford, Connecticut, Louisville, Kentucky, and Chicago. David earned his Master's of Architecture degree from Washington University in St. Louis and a bachelor's degree in English from Harvard College in Cambridge, Massachusetts. So thanks for joining us, David. Scott Farbman is a registered licensed architect, certified passive house consultant, and lead accredited professional who leads innovative research, provides sustainable consulting, and high-performance project management at Database Plus, a studio within DBHMS in Chicago. His recent research revolves around whole building carbon LCA and the impact early phase design decisions have on the total carbon footprint of a development. He assists project teams in developing sustainable strategies to reach low carbon goals, which includes consulting for both MEP, architectural design, and owner operations. Scott is currently the chair of the AIA Chicago 2030 Commitment Group, an initiative that sets goals and measures industry progress towards net zero energy and carbon performance by the year 2030. Scott is also an active participant in the City of Chicago's Building Decarbonization Working Group, providing his professional insights to assist in the creation of a decarbonization plan for the City of Chicago. He also volunteers with the Illinois Green Alliance's Energy Ambassador Program, which focuses on community outreach to promote simple energy efficient measures that can be done at any home to save utility costs and improve carbon footprint. So thanks a lot for joining us, Scott. And last but not least, we have Stephen Ortego. Stephen specializes in historic preservation and adaptive reuse projects, new contemporary designs for office buildings and mixed use buildings, and master planning for neighborhoods. Stephen is a graduate of Tulane School of Architecture, where he spent time in Central America and studied tropical architecture in Guatemala and Belize. Built his thesis project 5 times on the coast of Honduras. From 2012 to 2016, Stephen served as a member of the Louisiana House of Representatives. While a legislator, he served on the Commerce, Natural Resources, and Municipal committees. He focused on French immersion education, environmental initiatives, healthcare, and co-authored and led the bill that adopted the new Louisiana Plumbing Code. Stephen is an active board member of the U.S. Green Building Council, a LEED accredited professional, and has overseen the design and construction of several LEED certified houses. More recently, Stephen has led the charge to create a French immersion charter school in St. Landry Parish, and has overseen the team to develop the construction documents, code research, and schematic design for the rehabilitation of a historic school building in Sunset, Louisiana, adapting the building to new codes and modern teaching methodologies. So thank you, everybody, for joining the panel today. So just to get started, can everybody introduce themselves and give a brief background on your work developing or working on residential or multifamily projects? And can you share one lesson learned for architects when considering affordable housing? So Kevin, since you're first on my screen here, can we start us off?
Sure. Thanks for having me again. And Todd, fantastic presentation. Really enjoyed seeing your project. My name's Kevin Zepernick. I'm the CEO of Thrive Companies. We're based here in Columbus, Ohio. We're a relatively young firm. We've only really morphed into Thrive Companies about 4 years ago. We were kind of born out of a development shop called Wagenbrenner Development. That's actually a good partner of mine, or a good friend of mine that I joined forces with here about 4 years ago. We're quickly becoming one of the larger developers here in Columbus, and we specialize in mixed-use projects. Our core competency is based around heavy brownfield sites. So we have very large urban center core projects. In fact, all of our work in Central Ohio, this is our only market. All of our work here is condensed in the urban core. We've got right now just over 2,000 apartments under construction in Columbus, probably about 150 for sale units. a couple 100,000 square feet of office, and probably about 150,000 square feet of retail. We do not directly play in the affordable space, but something I'm very personally passionate about. I've spent a number of years up until recently as a board member for Habitat. Very well aware of the fact that for the vitality of my city and obviously of my community, that without affordable housing, attainable housing, some of the wonderful parts of Columbus will dissipate quickly. And so we focus at it from some different angles, much more from a heavy for-profit side. But it's something that, and again, I'm passionate about and very, very curious to hear the discussion today and talk a little bit more about that. I could say the one thing we've probably learned here recently about affordable housing or attainable housing, that I think it's very hard to legislate. And it's something I'll talk about in a second. I think that, a lot of my positioning today will be from more of a macro level, probably, a policy and political perspective, less probably rooted in design, like all of you wonderful people who've got crazy good skills and backgrounds. And happy to share that when it comes back around to me.
Thanks a lot, Kevin. David?
Sure. Yeah. Hi, everybody. I'm David Block. I'm an architect and planner, but I'm also a developer, the director of development for Evergreen Real Estate Group based in Chicago. We are a national company, not in 50 states, but we're always growing. So we're in about 8 to 10 states now. And we are almost exclusively an affordable housing developer. We do mixed use projects. We do mixed income projects. We generally don't do just kind of straight luxury or straight market rate housing. So almost everything we do has an affordable component to it. I guess a couple of lessons, some of which are maybe a little glib, some of which are maybe a little more serious. First, I think your audience here this afternoon is mostly architects, and I would say to support more affordable housing development, more architects should become clients, more architects should become developers. That's how I started my career, and I didn't quite know how to become a developer, but I eventually stumbled my way into it. And I think that I really appreciated what Todd had to say in his talk. It's an amazing, very ambitious project that you have done up there in St. Paul. So kudos for that. But the care and emphasis on design is really critical. And I think if we had more developers who took the care to encourage their design teams to be very thoughtful about the design of affordable housing, I think that can only benefit not just the clients, the tenants who are staying in these properties, but our neighborhoods and our communities as well, because these do become long-term community assets. One of the things that is really different about affordable housing compared to most market rate housing, and people don't get this. They think, oh, well, okay, if somebody's building a luxury tower, it must be really nice materials and be really well built. And that's generally not the case. Typically, affordable housing developments are better built. They're built to last longer than typical market rate developments because that's just the way the market is. Most market rate developers, the economics of their project have them building and filling up and selling their properties within a fairly short period of time. Whereas affordable housing developers tend to be build and hold type developers where there is a minimum 15-year hold period and often much longer than that. So the buildings need to be designed to last. And actually, I worked with Scott's firm on a couple of projects that are really cool examples that I'm happy to show a little bit later that are both really well built, but they're also wonderful community assets incorporating neighborhood branch libraries into affordable housing. So thinking about how architects can bridge over into the world of being clients, but also thinking about the longevity of these buildings in particular is very important. Oh, Adam, you are muted or something.
Sorry about that. Thanks a lot, David. Scott, can you introduce yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. My name is Scott Fartman. Trained as an architect, but I kind of wear an engineer's clothing now, so to speak. So I got my start off in the architecture world, but about 5 years ago, I pivoted to an engineering firm in which David referenced, working with DBHMS. And most recently within DBHMS, which is traditionally an MEP design firm, we've created the Database Plus Studio, which is a focus on research and data-driven design, and also human-centered design. So we've created a little niche for ourselves that will allow us to be more easily accessed in regards to high-performance buildings and things like that. Biggest pitfall for me, and again, I think I might be the voice of reason when it comes to energy and performance here, but I think that the biggest pitfall I've seen is not putting the occupants of the building first when it comes to indoor air quality and energy performance. And I'm sorry about that. I got a dog in the background. And I think that we're seeing now in the market that net zero energy is accessible at current construction costs. It just takes more design integration. It takes getting in earlier. And through our involvement with the DOE's Better Building Allyship, the government is really pushing net zero building design, and we're involved to help deliver that at as close to current cost as possible. So I'm going to be mostly harping on energy. So thank you for having me, and I look forward to the discussion.
Thanks. Stephen, can I have you introduce yourself?
Thank you, Adam. Yeah, my name is Stephen Ortego. I am an architect and developer in Lafayette, Louisiana. And for a little while, I actually was also a state representative for the state of Louisiana. And after being a state rep for 4 years, decided to start my own firm. We're about to hit the 5-year mark in a couple months. And we started doing real estate development as well. Kind of got tired of hearing people talking about redeveloping the urban core of Lafayette, and decided that we were going to jump out there and start doing it. Learned a lot of lessons from it over the last couple of years. And I'd like to echo what David said. More architects need to get out there and become their own clients. We bring a different perspective to the development community, because we come with that design and understanding what can happen and not happen pretty quickly and pretty fast, and get to a solution. I would say the biggest pitfalls for designers in housing, especially multifamily, is you definitely have to understand the codes, especially whenever you start talking about Fair Housing Act versus the ADA and when they are applied. The other bigger pitfall I found is you have to make sure that you have consultants who understand multifamily, because it's just a lot more complex and a lot more things going on than if you were just doing an office building.
All right, thanks a lot, Stephen. So let's get started with our panel discussion questions. Todd, I'm going to say that you probably introduced yourself sufficiently in your keynote speech, so thanks a lot. And one of the things that you did talk about were the kind of many barriers to entry when attempting to develop affordable housing projects, including scalability, access to investors, banks and lending, and community opposition. Can you talk about what successes you've had in financing challenging developments through public-private partnerships, joint ventures, charitable organizations, tax credits, or other funding opportunities? And I'd certainly like to hear from everybody, but Stephen, can you kick us off with this question?
Sure. I guess y'all really wanted us to show some example slides of projects. Justin, if you can show the Vermilion Lost project, and I can quickly say that when we were doing financing for this project, it's very interesting because it was one of the first of its kind in downtown Lafayette, mixed use. And I'm finding that when you go to the secondary market, which is one of those things that to be able to make projects work, you almost have to leverage the equity and go out and find the debt. And finding the permanent debt on a project that's this scale, this is only 26 dwelling units, is pretty challenging whenever you get to the secondary market. It's something that they're not used to seeing as much, but from an infill standpoint, there needs to be lots of smaller projects like this before you can get to larger projects, and especially in medium-sized cities like Lafayette. The other big challenge from a project like this is it's the intersection of two major roads. So we wanted to make it a mixed-use project with retail on the ground floor, and we were finding that anytime you go to HUD-backed loans, and in some cases Fannie and Freddie, that those entities are a little nervous about having mixed use, and especially I know for sure HUD doesn't want anything more than 20% of your income to be coming from the retail or any use other than multifamily. So it becomes a little more challenging whenever you do that. One other thing just to note about this project that's interesting is I'm seeing a typology that's being born in these smaller mixed use developments like this, that the ground floor ends up having a handful of accessible dwelling units. If it's a walk-up, this is a 4-story walk-up. And so you see this sort of this typology all across the country because of the Fair Housing Act, as well as just building codes in general, colliding with the cost of an elevator. So you see this sort of like up and down split that you'll see on this project. I don't know what else you want me to say.
No,
Adam.
thanks, Steve. No, thanks, Stephen. That's great. Scott, from a energy perspective, are there any financing opportunities that could help fund multifamily housing projects and allow them to be more cost efficient?
Yes, definitely. In apologies, my experience is going to be mostly limited to Illinois. So for those of you outside of Illinois, sorry, but maybe there could be other similar programs that address that. So yeah, we can leave it here. I want to talk about, I'm going to push Passive House because that's currently my passion. And there's two really great Passive House grant incentive programs in the state of Illinois right now. The first one is through the Illinois Clean Energy Community Foundation, ICECF, and they can give you up to $2 million to become passive, have a Passive House certification. But the hitch here is you also need to design and demonstrate net zero operation on energy. So that's a bit of a challenge, but we're seeing more affordable housing and mixed rate housing units mixed rate housing buildings chasing after this net zero energy target. So ICECF is probably the best one out there. ComEd, the electricity utility provider, also has an affordable housing program available. And if you check all the boxes with them, you can get up to $4.40 per square foot of your building. And they're going to require you to do things that go above code and ultimately meet what IDA has in place for that regard. But then ComEd has also newly launched a spinoff of the affordable housing incentive program, which is again geared towards Passive House. And if you get your Passive House certification, there's up to $350,000 available to go back to the development, which is pretty substantial to help cover, maybe a PV array system or a slightly better mechanical system or a slightly more robust envelope. That's enough money to get a couple more features on the project from my perspective. And on the screen here are the two C40 Reinventing Cities competitions that occurred in Chicago. The one on the left is in the Garfield Green neighborhood, which it completed a few years back, 2 to 3 years ago. And then on the right-hand side, this is the most recent Loop competition that wrapped up towards the end of last year and was awarded earlier this year. And both of these projects have a very, Garfield Green is predominantly affordable housing, I think 80%. And then this Assemble Chicago in the Loop is going to be the first 100% all affordable housing high rise in the downtown area of Chicago.
Maybe, Adam, I will piggyback on that, because I think there's some nice synergies and connections, especially since Scott's firm worked on the 2 projects I can show. I didn't send in my pictures, so I can share my own screen and show you this stuff. I will say that before I show these images, that if you are an architect and you're getting into the world of development, one of the things you very quickly learn is, just like architects need to reconcile sometimes conflicting interpretations of the building code, developers spend a lot of their time reconciling, mostly successfully, but sometimes not, the conflicting requirements of funding sources. So, for example, the Illinois Clean Energy Foundation grant program that Scott references is really hard to use in most affordable housing. And in the 2 building projects that we showed, we were considering a higher level of sustainability, either going to LEED Platinum or potentially even Passive House. And this foundation would only award funding to a nonprofit organization. And all tax credit driven housing, even those generated, led by Catholic Charities, or in the case of the 2 examples shown by Scott, POA is a nonprofit organization. The Community Builders is a nonprofit organization. I spent 12 years there. But all tax credit driven housing is by its nature for profit. Nonprofits have no use for tax credits. So in order to bring tax credit financing into a project, you need to set up a for-profit company. And sometimes foundations like the Illinois Clean Energy Foundation can't wrap their heads around that, because it is separate from their mission as a grant-making institution. So developers need to be clever about how they navigate this. And in the case of these 2 projects, and here I'll show my screen now, they just weren't able to get there. So this is one of the projects mentioning. This is the Independence Library and Apartments here in Chicago. So 16,000 square foot, 2-story neighborhood branch library on the 1st floor. And with a green roof deck in the back and parking underneath there. Some really wonderful details. John Ronan is the architect of this. This has won about a dozen awards. It's a really wonderful project that has completely transformed this neighborhood. A lot of really nice touches inside and outside. And then the other project is its twin sister project, which is the Northtown Library and Apartments project. This is by Perkins and Will. So both of these, to piggybacking on some of what Scott was saying, we evaluated the energy costs of these projects, and we ended up with a VRF heating and cooling system in both buildings. Slightly different implementation, but similar in some cases. And now I have the pleasure, as a owner, manager, operator of these facilities, of realizing that operating budgets for affordable housing generally require the salaries of the people who are operating these facilities to be squeezed. And so I have a very complex building automation system and a very complex HVAC system. And I have a guy who, may have a high school education, who is serving as the maintenance technician for this project. And so it then forces a lot of reliance on expensive service companies to come in and help maintain these systems. So there's sometimes a mismatch between the capital and the operations of these kinds of facilities, and developers need to be mindful of that, and designers need to be mindful of it as well. Here's more pictures of this. It's a cool project, and has a really unique, interesting aesthetic on the inside. I'll release the share here.
Thanks, David. That's great. Kevin, do you have anything to add regarding financing challenging projects?
Yeah, probably as I mentioned a little bit when I let in as my intro, we're not focused at all on affordable housing as a singular focus asset class. And so we are, again, mixed use, market rate. We are taking a unique approach, though, to try to solve some of the problems in our community. And so because of the scale of our sites, a lot of our sites, when we finish them out, could have as many as 1,500 to 2,500 residential units in a location. We are setting aside usually in our phases, and our phases vary anywhere from 250 to 350 multifamily units. We'll set aside 10% AMI units for average median income at 100%, 10% at 80. We're starting to push down into the 60% range. And I think someone had made a comment earlier about trying to isolate a building, maybe outside of certain corridors, certain neighborhoods, gives it a stigma of affordable housing. So we're trying to actually pull the affordable piece within our scalability. What we're finding is the scale is actually helping us achieve our financial numbers. And so we're not getting overly creative with our financing. We're just pretty straightforward equity, which we self-fund and debt structures. But we're able to offer quite a bit up to our city of Columbus in the way of keeping things, some units in check. The scalability is helping us tremendously. You're sharing amenities, you're sharing, common spaces. We're injecting them into market rate locations, which obviously tend to also be very close to a lot of the job centers that we're trying to serve. We're getting tremendous support from the local employers because of that, because a lot of their people can't always be a market rate resident or a for sale purchaser. And so we're finding that, we're getting a lot of support from our local companies that actually in many cases are singing our praises and actually helping push some of our projects to their people that may not be able to afford, to work in one location and have to push out into another. The one thing I wanted to kind of hit on, and this is my political statement for the day, and I'll stop with it because I'm a big believer of this. We're 4 million affordable attainable housing units short in the United States. And so I so appreciate and applaud all of the architects on this call and the wonderful focus you guys put into projects. And there's no way to replace that focus and that importance. The one thing I wanted to kind of press again is anybody that is pushing into that development world, and if you've got the ear of your local governments, we have to push supply, or we have to push supply. Demand is so far outpacing our supply right now in this country that we can do all the great projects in the world, and we're not going to make a dent in our challenges here around providing great housing for our country. The supply piece is an absolute must. And if you look at what's happening today, I'm sure every one of you have either gone through it yourself or know a friend. If they've gone to try to sell a house recently, they're probably getting 10, 15, 20% above ask. They're probably getting it in a matter of hours with 15 different no contingent, no inspection conditions to purchasing a home. The problem is that they're doing the same thing. Even if they make that money, they can't flip into the next unit. And why we're seeing, I think, this crazy appreciation in house values is we simply aren't building enough. So I think from my perspective, the greatest thing I can do as a developer to try to solve this is to make sure that I'm setting pace as much as I can, and constantly I'm in our ear constantly of our mayor and our local city councils, our suburb councils, our suburban mayors about pushing volume. And then the last piece around this, I think, just again from economics, density is key. I mean, I think there's no way to replace density. And so I think every one of us, I think Todd may have mentioned about how many times you've been yelled out of rooms and pushed out of spaces. I pretty much live that at least twice a week because I'm someone who's ruining someone's wonderful school district, or I'm putting too many of those people in their backyards. But the reality is some of the scale that we're achieving, just from pure economics, is just geared around density. We can, decrease our, underlying land purchase, in relation to unit costs. So I think it's a very, it's a political dance that has to be played. And, if we can solve some of the more of those challenges up front, I get even more excited about the wonderful architectural stuff than that you guys are doing when we actually get to do these projects.
Thanks, Kevin. And to that point, maybe I'll pivot a little bit. And, we all know that, and Todd, again, you brought it up in your presentation, many projects are derailed by community opposition, whether that be concerns about property value, increased traffic, higher taxes, loss of open space, safeties, et cetera. How do community concerns shape your approach to planning and design? And Kevin, since you were just talking about it, do you want to kind of follow up on that?
Sure. This might be one of the easier things from my perspective I shouldn't say to solve. I should say to try to combat. We get in early and upfront in every single community we're going into, and it becomes a grassroots effort. And we truly do a lot of listening. And so I think too often I see developers push into corridors and they've got their ideas and they've got some pro forma they need to drive a project by. And even if they are taking the time to meet with the community, they're not listening. And so we actually spend a considerable amount of time in little public hall forums, if you want to say, sometimes doing heavy design shreds, really getting into what people's core asks are. A lot of times, if you peel back the ugly that happens with the initial backlash of you trying to come in and put a project in there, a lot of problems aren't that hard to solve. It just really takes, I think, someone to go in there and even help guide them and help the local population understand what the project means, what it does for their corridor, what it does for their job creation. So few people don't understand that housing is maybe the biggest driver of today for certain of companies placing down anchors in certain locations. I mean, it's the number one thing they're looking for, maybe outside of like some tax abatements for their real estate taxes. But honestly, the first question I get asked every time we're courting an office developer is, where are my people going to live? Taking the time to explain that to local residents where you want to insert a project, I think usually helps get them to a closer understanding with where you're coming from. And then truly making sure you take the time to hear out, what they're really saying and do it early. Do it often. Don't go in there with preconceived notions, and do as much as you can to take those suggestions into your, to your structure, to your design, to your project.
Thanks. And Todd, I know that you touched on this in your presentation, but do you want to talk about how you might work with local communities to push through projects that might have some opposition?
Sure. The only thing, I think Kevin's response was right on. I'd probably say exactly what he did. Get in there early. You have to listen. The worst thing you can do is come into a neighborhood with a preconceived plan, because you're just ramming it down their throat. You haven't listened to what they have to say. The other thing in Minneapolis, before we start any project, we go to the city council person who represents that neighborhood, sit down with them, tell them exactly what we're doing, what are their concerns, what are their comments. We take that back, and that's key. If you don't get their support on a project, it is never going to happen, regardless of how many neighborhood meetings you go to. So that's key. And everything Kevin said is exactly what we try to do. That you can't respect someone if you don't come in there with the opportunity to listen to what they have to say and what their needs are. And I can't tell you how many developers get just blown out of a room because they bring the drawings before anything has even been discussed. So I thought Kevin had an excellent response to the question.
I actually find that you get less community pushback whenever you can communicate through renderings and drawings. And most of the times whenever either my clients or us as developers, when we get to any sort of public hearing, a lot of times people come really upset and angry just because they don't know what it is. And then the second you show them what it is and you can really communicate what it is, they get very comfortable very quickly. Or sometimes, I mean, I've had people that have left early from meetings and said, oh, well, I know it's going to be nice, so I'm going. But it really is, if you have to go for a public meeting or not, it does make a big difference. I've actually had clients who have walked away from projects because they were going to have to go for rezoning, or they were going to have to go for, instead of going through a private division of land, it was such a big project, they were going to have to go through a public hearing. But I do find that if you communicate with people, that very often they love what you're trying to do, but you have to show them how it fits into their community and how it fits into the scale of what's around. Actually, Justin, if you want to show Enclave, one thing I find in our community that's really tough is when you go for a division of property, and one of the more affordable housing types out there with a lot of density as well are townhouses. And I think, Kevin, you do a lot of single family work, but this, for instance, is a townhouse development where we really start to it's kind of almost transitioning from a suburban area to a more urban area where you still have the 2-car garages, but the density is there. Whenever you turn in a plan like this, or usually what's required in our community is to have a plat and show all of the different property lines that are going to be on it. Sometimes it can be very intimidating whenever you're dividing into this small. But in the reality, you can just go and build an apartment complex with even higher density and not have it divided. But most of the people in the community just get that one paper that shows how dense it's going to look, and they freak out over it until you start to explain to them that this could actually be denser with one giant piece of property rather than dividing it up. But at this point, you have a much better chance of having ownership in the community. This project actually is almost 100 dwelling units, does have a little bit of multifamily, like the building to the left is multifamily, but everything else is single family. And like Kevin was saying, when you start to get to a certain scale, you can start having amenities that are shared. The more density you can build into it, the more you can respond to the market and provide more affordable housing to people. That a lot of the developers that I've worked with, they like to play in sort of the lower middle class range because they know that it's going to sell very quickly and it won't sit on the market. Of course, these days it seems like nothing sits on the market, right, Kevin?
Just have a quick bit to add that I think is interesting. Referencing back to the 2 C40 competitions led by the city of Chicago. In the first competition, on the left here for Garfield Green, the competition ended in February 2019, and the first community meeting wasn't until something like December 2020. And there were a lot of concerns, blowback, et cetera. So I'd like to think that the city learned their lessons from that first major competition, and going into the Loop C40 competition, there was a lot more community engagement during the development process of the competition designs, and each shortlisted competition team, I think there were 4 at the end, had to give presentations to the community. So there was a much bigger and more robust community engagement piece in this most current competition that I think, when you have these things run by the city, they need to be on board too and understand the nuances of the process as well, which I think you could maybe take for granted sometimes. And
David,
I hope no one from the city.
Yeah.
I hope no one from the city is here because they might get.
David, do you have anything to add to this or discussion?
No, I mean, I think our panel has covered the waterfront there. I guess the one thing I would insert into this is how projects come to be in the first place. And the 2 projects on the screen are an interesting example of this. And I don't know if the folks who are in the development world here, Kevin and Stephen, have thoughts on this. But earlier in my career, I had a certain amount of resistance to spending a lot of time and energy as a developer going after RFP responses. But I had also had some advice from a mentor of mine, and he said one of the most important things as a developer is to go where you're invited. And I think my resistance maybe came as a younger developer, where I ended up being the one to do most of the work in these RFPs. And I guess the more experience I got, the less work these RFPs started seeming to me, and the more it became a bit of a community conversation. And certainly our experience in Chicago has shown that there is real value in the kind of RFP process, because the community is not only inviting a developer in, they're saying exactly what they want. Or they are saying to the developer, these are our goals, tell us how you will meet those goals. And if done well, and if the RFP was developed in concert with the community in the first place, which again, if there are folks from the city of Chicago here, is sometimes the case, most of the time the case, but not always the case, then it can be a very process where the community is sort of initially bought into the goals of the project before the developer even gets to sit at the table. So there can be real value in that, because there is comfort in knowing that this is something that the community really wants to do, as opposed to a developer spending a lot of money buying a piece of land and not being sure that this is something that's actually going to get approved.
Great, thanks, David. So I do want to talk a little bit about communities and vacant and abandoned properties, right? They can really be a blight on any neighborhood. They can create unsafe conditions, including environmental issues, concerns about crime and safety, loss of potential community tax base and property value. The Journal of Urban Health noted in a Philadelphia study that boarded up housing and vacant land was perceived to influence community well-being by decreasing residents' control over neighborhood life, fracturing ties among neighbors, raising concerns about crime and safety, and exerting a negative financial strain on the community. Pandemic policies have exacerbated this problem, especially in our most vulnerable communities. According to the World Economic Forum, nearly a quarter of small businesses have closed due to coronavirus shutdowns. Can you talk about some successes and challenges you've had in redeveloping vacant industrial land or converting existing unused buildings to a new use, and the impact it has had on the surrounding neighborhoods? And Kevin, I'm going to ask you to start this off as well, because I do know that you've redeveloped a lot of urban and brownfield sites. And there's certainly significant challenges associated and costs really associated with that kind of work.
Definitely all of our sites are intense and crazy. First off, usually starting with the EPA. We have sometimes our site prep alone can be 2 to 3 years in some projects by the time we get through the remediation of the ground. And so we've actually recruited a very skilled team that understands this space. We actually have we have a full-time EPA attorney that we employ to help us navigate these waters and understands how we need to position ourselves to get through all the requirements to get these brownfields restored. What we find though, the impact to the community is tremendous. I'm sitting right now in a 65-acre site in the center of Columbus that was an old industrial wasteland. Had a tremendous amount of contaminated soils, hadn't been really in use maybe in probably 50, 60 years. Our repositioning of this property has seen the entire corridors around us just take flight. We're seeing mom and pop shops pop up to support the population we're growing. So we're seeing a lot of like little neighborhood retail kick into gear. We've actually made the other residential units in the area more valuable, because we're making it much safer. The one thing I can say in tackling sites like this, maybe the biggest thing that we focus on is a core requirement for how we try to execute is speed. I know everybody says, yes, we want to go quickly, but the reality is like these big behemoth sites can lose momentum very quickly. And not just from the financial perspective, they can lose the momentum of the support from the surrounding neighborhood. People are really excited about seeing something new and energetic come to their area. They don't want to be living in a war zone for 10 years with construction around them and, traffic coming in and out from the construction side. And so we do everything we can when we tackle these sites to appropriately prep them. But when we start going vertical, we push like crazy. Sometimes doing some stuff that's a little more economically risky. Instead of tackling one phase at a time, we may tackle 5 or 6. But we feel like as long as we continue to keep the momentum going and moving quickly, like usually the feedback once we get started from the neighborhood is pretty tremendous. And we do a lot of tours. to keep the engagement going long after the RFPs are won and long after we've actually like won someone's support to do a project, we double down. And so we open back up to the communities quite a bit. And in most cases, we're almost giving visual updates, site walks, walking through buildings, opening it up on a regular basis to the neighborhood so they can see what's actually being built, not just from afar, but actually like they feel like they're part of the project.
Great, thanks, Kevin. David, I know you've redeveloped a lot of existing buildings, including legacy lofts and Aurora St. Charles. Can you talk a little bit about your decision to engage in this kind of renovation projects and why you think that's beneficial either to the community or financially?
Sure, I'll share my screen again. This is, I'll let you guess whether this is a before or after photo. It's a little bit of a cliche that the greenest building is the one that's already there. But developers who work in adaptive reuse, rely on that approach because it's true. And I guess when you're redeveloping historic properties in particular, and this doesn't really apply to brownfields, there's a different set of economic tools available for brownfields, but when you're taking a historic building, there are an increasingly broad set of economic tools that are available that actually help make the project work. So at the federal level, there is the historic tax credit, and many states now have their own state historic tax credit program. And these tools can bring something on the order of 20 to 40, even 45% of the cost of redeveloping these properties into the capital stack. So they're important. This is an image of the Aurora St. Charles Hospital before we took it over. So you can see it's a little bit of a horror show. Before, this building had been vacant for more than 5 years, but windows had been left open. Water was getting into the building everywhere. It had been vandalized all over, so it was a real challenge. Beautiful historic stained glass windows had been broken out and boarded up to prevent any further damage. But you take a look at a building like this, and you can see the masonry is actually still in pretty good shape. And this building had phenomenal bones. It was built in 1932, and they really don't build them much better than they built this building. And so we had a really good base to start from. And so, you could see even in its really sort of downtrodden state, there was tremendous potential here. And so we were actually, again, invited in by the mayor of Aurora, Illinois, second largest city in the state, to redevelop this project. And this is what it looks like now. And it's been a wonderful project. It's now 60 units of affordable senior housing, supported tremendously by the state, by the city of Aurora, and by our federal tax credit investors. And a building like this is, it's hard not to fall in love with this, but more importantly, I think the neighbors, unlike other situations where you had neighbors saying, we don't want those people in our neighborhood, the neighbors were actually cheering when we were walking through the building, doing the initial survey to look at the condition of the masonry, like, okay, these people are going to clean up this problem because it's a vacant hazardous building sitting next to their houses. So this can only improve their property values. Not all historic redevelopment sites are as attractive as this one, but in this case, it really turned out well. And, we're really proud of not just saving this building, but creating, housing units like this that provide a great opportunity for the seniors in Aurora to have an affordable place to live.
Great, thanks, David. Stephen, I know that you are involved in a lot of historic preservation and have projects like the Bank of Lafayette redevelopment. Do you want to talk a little bit about adaptive reuse and preservation?
Yeah, so my firm does specialize in historic preservation. We've done several historic tax credit projects But one thing, and Justin, maybe you can show trapeze. So I've actually recently teamed up with another architect, real estate developer based out of New Orleans by the name of Marcel Wisnia. And he and I purchased, this is an old cannery. You might have seen trapeze, okra or sweet potatoes or beans in the grocery store. They're actually international. But in '92, they shut down this canning plant. And we talk about brownfield sites. This is 188,000 square feet under roof of an old canning plant. One thing that's nice about having a food-based is it's usually not a brownfield. This one, fortunately for us, only had a little bit of asbestos that needs to be remediated. But it's also on 23 acres and it's on the Vermilion River in the middle of Lafayette, really close to the airport. And we're doing public-private partnership, not only by using state and national historic tax credits, but as well as working with the city. We offered, there's across the river, a 30-acre park that we offered to help in the replant or the master planning for this park. We ended up, not only was 2 architecture development firms not big enough for this project, but we're bringing in another firm who's done very similar developments using a mixture of new construction and historic buildings, where we'll fit in probably 4 or 5 story mixed use buildings, mostly with the multifamily, and using some of these bigger warehouse buildings for more retail. This is actually the old railroad spur that ran into here. So it's got a really interesting history. Until the 70s, it was mostly, you had most of the plant was supplying the whole country and even receiving sweet potatoes and okra from around the area by train. After the 70s, they switched over to more trucks. But the site even has a history of a salt mine up the river that they had a salt company on this site. They also had a lumber company on this site. So doing the research, you have to put it on the National Registry before you can start getting historic tax credits. So it's been a very interesting process so far of getting it on the National Registry, starting to do the master plan process, working with the city to help them with public parks that are across the river. And actually, it's been such a great symbiotic relationship with the city that they've even already put money aside to pay for a pedestrian bridge across the river, which at this point is about 150 foot wide. So it's going to be an interesting case study from here on out, with new construction, historic buildings, riverfront, public-private partnerships, both tying into public parks, but also public-private partnership with the fact that you're receiving tax credits from both the state and federal governments. We forget to say that when public-private partnership, oftentimes when it's a tax credit, it is a public-private partnership. This project where we're going to be going after low-income tax credits will probably have about 30 to 40% of the housing type will be low income. The rest will be market rate. So it's a pretty large project, but we love doing historic preservation. We love doing our own real estate development. So this is where it all will start to come together, and it'll be interesting to see what happens in the next couple of years, as we should be finishing the master plan process, where we will be doing charrettes with stakeholder groups as well as public charrettes, especially in the public parks portion. The city's so excited about it, they actually expanded into another park across the river further down. So it's become, it went from our 23 acre site, adding a 30 acre park, to another 50 acres for another park. So it's exciting to see that type of, like Kevin was saying, you got to get that momentum going. And I'm definitely seeing the momentum going so far. And in January, we should be unveiling the master plan. We already have tenants who are ready to move in, including anywhere from a brew pub to an outfitter who wants to launch kayaks into the river. So.
Thanks, Stephen. So to piggyback on what David was talking about in regards to developer RFPs, the available city is the theme of this year's Chicago biennial. It highlights vacant public land in the city of Chicago. And there are certainly programs like the Invest Southwest, which is currently underway initiative that has sought to develop targeted or abandoned land and encourage developers to build in communities that may be seen as higher risk. The hope is that these projects will stimulate future commercial growth. In your opinion, in what ways can local, state, or federal governments support community growth better? I don't know, Todd, do you have any thoughts on government policy, et cetera? I know it's a can of worms, but.
Yeah, you're talking to the lower class here. Yeah, I'm not that. I really don't have much to say on that would be that meaningful to the conversation. So yeah.
Okay.
I mean, I guess the only thing I would say, most of the affordable housing projects in the state of Minnesota are funded through the Minnesota Housing Finance Agency. And so things are filtered through them. They have their own standards they have their own architectural guidelines. They have their own architectural fee structure and things like that. I do know that there are a number of architects that don't want to work in the affordable housing arena because of the MHFA standards for architectural fees. And so we're pushing for trying to get fees to be increased so there's more interest and more momentum behind the whole affordable housing arena, that more folks are involved and more folks see the opportunity to engage in this kind of development. So.
I guess I'll just open it up to the panel here. If anybody has anything to add. We've talked about it a little bit, but Stephen?
We talked about the historic tax credit. There's actually the bill that's currently in Congress, the infrastructure bill, currently in its state, they do have an increase for several years for the national tax credit from 20% to 30%, which would be a huge deal for a lot of projects that are right now are no-goes that could fall into the go category. So that's definitely something on the federal government side. As far as local governments, I think a lot of times it's having the help to get through all of the processes, right? There's just so many people who you have to check the boxes, and you have so many people who are looking at your stuff and trying to make sure. But having local governments that make it easier for developers to be able to come in and understand how to navigate that process, or maybe even opportunities for not only making the process easier, but maybe there's areas where you can, for instance, the permitting process could maybe become more streamlined. I think that's one of the things a lot of developers have to struggle with. And then as far as like government-backed loans and such, one thing that I'm finding as a challenge is when you're trying to do a mixed-use project, but also do affordable housing. Actually, Justin, if you want to show the Methodist Church project, this is a project that we are applying for what they call a 9% tax credit for affordable housing. And we're working with the First United Methodist Church on the edge of downtown Lafayette. A lot of churches all across the country have lots of land near them that they bought up over the years. At one point, it was either because they wanted to grow and have more services, or they wanted more parking. And now what they're realizing is that it might be better for them to start to develop their land. The church is the one in the blue, and actually the red buildings are buildings that we actually have already developed. But we're looking at this phase one, and some of the policies are you have to have parking for on site. Well, whenever you start getting to more urban areas, it might be hard to do that. So we're having to look at phasing this development. The other challenge we're finding is, even though it's on a cross street of two major roads that really want to have a mixed use building and not just simply a residential building, the way those 9% low income tax credits function is they won't grant you anything for the income that you would get from a commercial portion. So we're finding it as a challenge to be able to meet the community needs of having that mixed use because of the way the tax credit is set up. So those are some government policies that sometimes could get in the way of creating good urbanism and good communities.
I'll piggyback on Stephen's answer here, and I guess to go back to the original question that Adam brought up, or the original theme, the available city and land. A couple of thoughts here. First, you referenced programs like in Chicago, the Invest Southwest program, which is a City of Chicago initiative. It's actually, in some ways, this current mayor, Lori Lightfoot's answer to the initiative where we were selected to do the 2 library projects under her predecessor, Rahm Emanuel. So if you can, we all exist in a political world. So if you as a developer, or you as an architect and a member of a design and development team can speak to the priorities of a political leader, that's always something that is helpful, because it's typically that's how you unlock the keys to the money you need to make a project happen. And I wanted to sort of use that program to piggyback on one of the questions that's open in the Q&A box here. It references that my thought is we as developers should only go into communities where we're invited. How do developers build trust with communities to the point where they become trusted advisors, rather than being seen as external interlopers, which is a great question. And I will say that in the Invest Southwest program, we had somewhat naively assumed that the City of Chicago, in issuing RFPs, there were a dozen RFPs issued for this program, that the city had all the politics fully covered, and that we would be welcomed as developers with open arms in the communities we went into. Well, we were selected as one of the developers for this Invest Southwest community, one of the first RFPs that was issued, and the community hated it. They hated everything that we were proposing. They hated the density of the housing. They wanted a commercial building. They wanted a grocery store. And they felt like they already had enough affordable housing. They wanted crime addressed and things like that. So to answer Robin's question, I think from our perspective as developers, you need to really engage. And this goes back to some of what Kevin was saying initially. You've got to communicate, and you've got to be open with the community. So I think the most important thing is you've got to have a real conversation with the community to the point that they trust you, that you're actually telling the truth, that you're not giving them some type of corporate spin, or you're not speaking developer speak in order to just come in and make money off the backs of the communities, because all of this work is community development. And you need to recognize and emphasize the community part of community development, and recognize that while you may not live there, the folks who do have a really strong vested interest in what you're doing. And so in that Invest Southwest situation, what really kind of changed the conversation was when people were yelling at us and saying, we don't want this, we don't like this density. And we just took a step back and said, you know what, you're right. And this proposal that you hate, we're throwing it out. We're starting over. And so we had to backtrack a little bit. We had to redesign. But in the end, I think it's a stronger project, and the community still doesn't love everything about it, but they're a lot further along. So I think that's an important aspect of it. And I'll just pick up on one quick thing that Stephen said. So Working with churches is a fabulous idea. And so if I could steal the screen one more time, I'm going to try to do this. This will stop. Say yes. All right. So we are also working with the United Methodist Church in Atlanta. And it happens to be the oldest Protestant congregation in the city of Atlanta. So it's right downtown. It's in the shadow of the 60-story SunTrust Tower. So we have an opportunity to build density on 2 very small parking lots. So total land area is about 1.5 acres. And we're looking to put about 350 units on here and 350 parking spaces. So again, getting back to Kevin's point about getting to scale, I don't know if I'm going to succeed at this. The people in Atlanta are looking at me like, you're not from around here, are you? But if this succeeds and this model succeeds, and the current mayor, who is unfortunately not running again, made a $1 billion commitment to affordable housing, which means generating something on the order of 10,000 units of affordable housing. Well, let us help you, Mayor. Here's 300 plus units in the heart of downtown, this is 85% affordable. So I think land is can be tricky, especially in good neighborhoods, but being creative about how you find that land is a really good way to build the base for a project that can both speak to public priorities and also get some really good projects done.
David, good luck, because I know the people in the Methodist Church that I'm working with are actually looking at that project as well.
No kidding. All right.
Yeah, they've actually talked about it. So.
We should talk. Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to pivot a little bit. And, we've been talking a lot about affordable housing. And one thing that, David, that you had brought up before was kind of ongoing maintenance of properties that you're holding for a significant amount of time, right? So there's some cost of ownership as well over time. So I think we also want to talk about sustainability, right? Sustainability of the properties, cost of operations, et cetera. So, while it's critical to meet communities' needs for affordable housing, I hope that everybody on the panel would agree that we should be finding ways to meeting those needs in a sustainable way. Projects aren't going to be realized if the first cost budget constraints aren't met, and we probably have all engaged in value engineering of envelope and building systems away from the more sustainable practices. Can you talk about ways that you've been able to creatively incorporate sustainable practices to get your buildings, buildings that perform at a higher level than the baseline standard, either through novel design or funding incentives? And Scott, I'll let you hit this one.
Did you want David to start there with his experience, and then I can follow up? That's how I interpreted
No. Go ahead. I was
Okay.
just bringing it back to David's experience in operating buildings. Over a long term. Yeah.
I think what David brought up is an excellent conundrum where we as practitioners in the industry were being pressured to deliver higher performing buildings, whether it be from the community. Let's see, I don't know which. Go to my last slide, please, Justin. 2 more, maybe. Yeah, 1 more. Okay. Oh, back 1. So, as we're pressured more to deliver high performance buildings and achieve goals of net zero energy or carbon, that involves getting more technical on the system side. And I think that's a conundrum that, unfortunately, as more of these buildings are built and operated, people are it's gonna figure out how to use them. And that's not the greatest answer, I realize, but I don't know how you get that market transformation until you just start building these things and being forced to learn how to operate them. A lot of people have been wishy-washy on VRF when we presented it to them. Heartland Alliance was a little bit nervous too. But when you have ultimate goals of sustainability and high performance, you ultimately have to go down that route. I'll say from my perspective, one thing that I want to bring up that doesn't have to do with energy performance is, let's say that we need to do a better job figuring out how to quantify health and wellness and indoor air quality, because you don't get a return on investment on that. It's not reducing your energy bills every month. You're not saving money by providing a higher quality indoor environment. And I think that's really the next crucial topic in the realm of sustainability. Like, put carbon aside for a second, but we're still, people like to say we're post-COVID, but I don't really think we are. How do we ensure that the occupants of our design buildings are staying healthy, getting good indoor air quality, and are promoting a healthy lifestyle? So I guess I'm proposing a question back to the panel unintentionally, but I would love to talk about that topic.
Yeah, I mean, Kevin, I guess I'd be interested from a marketing perspective, especially in market rate housing, or specifically in market rate housing, whether you're seeing people find value in either sustainability or sustainable practices in housing.
I'd say yes to some degree. I'm not actually sure. I may be way off in this because I'm not sure if this really fits into, sustainability. I look at it, sustainability from a pure automobile standpoint. I know one of the things we tackle quite a bit is that we place our projects in locations where we hope most people don't have to have a car. So it's extremely intentional, whether it be on public transportation. I think Stephen was just talking about it, his cool project. I forget what the name of it was, but it's located on a river corridor. We're actually behind a major initiative right now in Columbus, Ohio called Rapid 5. If anybody wants to check it out, it's pretty cool. It's rapid5.org. We've actually gone as far now as establishing a 501c3, but we think we can take back all of our river corridors in Columbus and connect them to our major park districts. And so when it's all said and done, it's about 180 linear miles of parkland. We are placing almost every one of our projects touch these corridors in this manner. From a sustainability standpoint, and we look at as much as we can push people into environments where they can live, play, and work without having to get back into a car. That's probably our biggest contribution to that space. From a building design standpoint, I'm definitely not the expert in that area. We are trying to integrate much more intelligent design, orientation to sun, the right type of building materials. We are definitely going heavy smart from an energy saving standpoint. So in all of our units today, we have actually smart hubs that run, thermostats, locks, lighting. So that's a basic package for our apartment users, just to hope we can reduce some of the energy costs and consumptions. We're doing, different type of lighting schemes in corridors that, definitely have all the safety requirements still built in, but will definitely power down at certain times to save energy. I'm not necessarily sure how much people value if they really dig into the sustainability side, or if they're really just happy to have the convenience. Either way, it's proving out well for us. And I think, the biggest piece, I think the sustainability side for me is just the right location can really take, specifically around carbon, can take a lot of carbon out of the world if you just get people to get out of their cars and get on some bikes or a scooter or walk.
I'd jump back in quickly there.
Yep.
I just want to remind everyone that the building sector is almost 40% of the total carbon emissions in the globe. And while transportation is big, the materials we put into our buildings and the energy used to operate them is substantial. And if we're trying to deliver, high performing, low carbon buildings, we need to look at everything that goes into it, even down to the adhesives, sealants, paints, studs, concrete, you name it. Needs to be top priority if we're trying to be sustainable.
Yeah, one thing I'd like to add to the conversation is just life cycle costs. I think it may have been David that talked about the quality of materials and affordable housing projects. But I know in our affordable housing projects, we use much nicer kitchen cabinets than market rate projects we're working on. We have dovetailed drawers, we have plywood boxes. On the work we do with Catholic Charities with the precast, we've got a concrete inside, concrete outside with a insulated core. And so there's less maintenance in terms of people banging on the walls, et cetera. And so when you start to look at life cycle costs, we've renovated, I can't tell you how many units, thousands of units. The people put the cheapest kitchens in there. 5 years later, you're throwing them out and replacing them. So also the other thing are just cleaning materials. So one of the reasons in our shelters we use polished concrete is we can use a mild detergent and water to clean the floors, and we don't need, you know, large chemicals and polishes and things that all affect indoor air quality and issues related to that. So it does help clients when you're having those conversations, talk about life cycle costs and what things are going to be within the life of the building rather than just what the upfront cost is for the project. And I think that's really helped us with sustainability goals and getting people on board for what the bigger picture is.
Even with location, we purposely located that first project that I showed, the Million Lofts. We purposely located it based partially off of walk score. So I don't know how many people are looking at walk score, but if you go to walkscore.com, you can find out exactly what the walkability is, actually the bikeability as well. And I think we had a walk score of 92 whenever we decided to locate it at that location. So it automatically had amenities within walking distance, and it became really important. When you're that small of a scale, you can't afford to put the amenities in a project like this. You have to be within walking distance of public amenities as well, such as playgrounds and parks.
All right, thanks a lot.
Yeah, Kevin, have you ever used WalkScore?
I haven't, but I'm definitely going to look into it.
So I do want to say that Scott, I think, has a hard out here at 4:50. So I did want to thank him for joining the panel. And as Justin said before we started, he's going to be sending out contact information to all the attendees for the panelists. So if you have any questions for Scott, you'll have an opportunity to ask them offline.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me. Feel free to shoot me an email if you have any questions. And yeah, thanks.
All right. Thanks a lot, Scott. So I do want to just wrap up the questions with one final about the future of affordable housing, or of housing in general, maybe. So I know that David talked about the kind of two novel projects that he worked on that combined affordable housing and a neighborhood public library, Independence Apartments and the Northtown Apartments. So it was the library, and so, you know, the library co-location served as an anchor and an amenity for the community, and the apartments were a mix of public housing, heavily subsidized apartments, and in one case, market rate units. Todd, you went into detail about the Higher Ground project in Minneapolis and St. Paul, took the transitional housing mode to the next level. You know, ever since the housing projects of the 50s and 60s, designers and planners have been struggling with a workable, affordable housing model. And I guess I'd ask that if you guys can talk a little bit about successes you've seen both with these projects and with others, and give your opinion about the general future of housing. And Todd, you touched on this a little bit at the end of your presentation in terms of what you thought the perfect model is, I guess. But do you want to go into a little bit more detail on that?
Yeah, we're exploring that model with Simpson Housing right now, where the shelter is significantly smaller than what we did for Higher Ground, but we still do have permanent housing above. And I think everybody on our team is very much in agreement that that's a great model, that it doesn't separate classes and it gives people an opportunity to move up once their income is increased and they become stable. And I also just kind of would reiterate many of what the comments that others have talked about, that our most successful projects are along transportation corridors where we can reduce the use of cars. A lot of young folks are now realizing that I don't need a car, and it's a heck of a lot less expensive not to have insurance and car payments and all of that. And if you're plugged into transportation, that's a great model. Minneapolis, St. Paul has one of the best bike networks in the entire country, and we've got one of the coldest climates. So we're a good example of you can get outside and get transportation throughout the winter in the Twin Cities and still have it favorable commute. The other thing I think is really important is the whole notion of mixed income affordable or mixed income projects, that there are great examples throughout Europe that you can't tell who's an affordable unit and what's a market rate unit. And mixing those together, I think, is key to making successful neighborhoods. I think when you go to places where that's where the poor people live, literally next to market rate housing, I think is just a very, very bad example. And it doesn't set the right precedent, doesn't really show a dignified solution to urban planning. I really love it when people look at our projects and say, I never realized that was an affordable housing project, because it just shows that, the project does stand up with others, and that's something I think we need to do more of in the future. I think there have been great examples of Stevens projects as rehab projects and taking land that was once one use and starting to creatively think about how we can generate that into new uses. And some of our more interesting projects in the office have been adaptive reuse, taking old buildings and you get some really interesting units. And everybody loves to see a building that hasn't had any occupancy for several years, and you come in and give it new life. And the neighborhoods are often just ecstatic that this is transforming, a neighborhood that wasn't in very good shape before. So I think there's been some just great discussions and examples from all the panelists and how we can move this forward.
Absolutely. Stephen, do you have any thing you'd like to add about what you're seeing in your kind of market area and the future of housing?
What we're finding is and this is probably true for lots of cities in the South, or I should say the Sun Belt. There's just really fast growth, and trying to keep up with it is very tough. So having more developers like Kevin who are thinking really big is really key to a lot of cities across the United States, but especially in the Sun Belt. And there's projected growth that my town is supposed to be in the top 20 fastest growing cities in the next 5 years. So it's becoming a challenge. How do you start to how do your schools adapt to that? How does your infrastructure adapt to that? I mean, we've already had challenges in our urban core for sewer capacity. And how do you pay for that? How do you reroute it? And it just takes years and years to solve those types of problems. So sewer capacity, infrastructure, we're starting to have to think more about bikes. We're starting to have to think more about mass transit. I think it's going to be a challenge for a lot of cities across the United States that never had to think about that sort of thing, that it was much bigger cities that had to think about that sort of thing. But as you see this growth, and I think especially post or during COVID, the ability to work from anywhere is become a lot more popular. And so people are saying, well, I can move anywhere I want and work anywhere I want. So more and more talent, especially young talent, they're just looking for a quality of life, which is why projects like some of the projects that were shown during the panel are so important for attracting that growth as well, from river systems, because now if people can afford, it's cheaper to go live in a smaller city and still work there, but you have to have the housing. So that's going to be the big challenge, I think, is how do those medium-sized cities that are more affordable, how do they keep up?
Kevin, do you want to add anything to the future of housing? Yeah. As you say,
I'll double back down on my one statement around density.
sure.
I just
Okay.
look at our country, and honestly, what I'm a little terrified right now, and I hope we get a substantial infrastructure bill passed, because if you look at the infrastructure of our country, it's eroding. And I mean, bridges, roads, sanitary lines, pushing outward and not densifying our world is going to be, catastrophic over a period of time, because we just can't maintain. It's just linear feet. It's math. The less we go upward or densify an area, and the more we push out. Every time you add an extra foot to a project, or add an extra foot of pipe, an extra foot of road, and it may not have impacts today. And so I look at Stephen's problem, or challenges, good challenges to have, is being in a city with crazy good growth. I think that we owe it as developers and architects and land planners to really educate, our municipal leaders and say, guys, you got to think about this in a smart way, because don't get caught up with, hey, this is great, and all these people are coming, and just allow for sprawl to occur. I think municipalities have got to double down on, reusing, neglected land, forgotten land, going back in and touching great buildings that are there. But I think it has to be in a densified manner, and I think it needs to be connected. And so I think we can solve a lot of ills if we just get smarter about those elements. I'm hoping I see our country go in that direction. I know every day I'm on the soapbox saying this to everybody around me that will listen.
Great, thanks, Kevin. And David, any last words in regards to future of development or housing?
We just need more money. It's really simple.
Yeah.
I think the one thing that gives me hope now is that affordable housing is in the conversation in Washington every day in a way that it wasn't 5 years ago. There were some really promising provisions related to housing, not I think in the infrastructure bill, but in the next bill that was being contemplated. But it seems to be a little dysfunctional right now. I heard that Joe Manchin wants to scale down that second bill from $3.5 trillion to $1.5 trillion. So not sure how much of the housing provisions will remain after that happens, but more money because the market won't provide it, right? The market will not provide affordable housing naturally. The economics just don't work. The cost of construction has gone through the roof. But the rents are beyond the reach of many families to afford. So you need government subsidy to afford it. And if the government actually steps up with a new set of tools and a new range of programs, then we as developers and designers can actually make this happen.
Great, thanks a lot. I'd certainly love to hear more from everybody, but I think we've gone to the end of our time here. I want to thank David Block, Stephen Ortago, Kevin Zepernick, Scott Farbman, Todd Rhoades, and maybe I can ask the panelists, where can the audience find more information about you, your work, or your practice? Where can they connect with you? LinkedIn, email, Twitter, and is there anything else that anybody wants to plug before they leave? Stephen?
Well, definitely you can see more about some of the work we've accomplished in the last couple of years as a firm at sostudioarchitecture.com. We're also on LinkedIn. I have a personal on LinkedIn as well as my company, SO Studio. We also have Facebook. We have Instagram. Actually, our Instagram's pretty active. SO Studio Arch, ARCH. And I guess that's it. I'd love to hear from anybody if they have any questions or if they have any suggestions.
Sure. Kevin?
Our website's just thrivecos.com. But I'm active on LinkedIn. So I would love to to have anybody on this call today to hit me up. I'd be willing to connect. And if you guys are ever in Columbus, happy to give a tour of our projects. We've got some pretty cool things going on. We got one final plug because this one's going to be fun. Steven, this is mostly for you because I look at some of the things you're doing around the river. Check out our Quarry Trails project. Just Google Quarry Trails, Columbus, Ohio. It's a 660 acre quarry. It's got an adventure park in it, but it's got kayak runs and all that fun. But yeah, I'd love to hear from anybody on LinkedIn, and definitely love to give tours if you guys are in the market.
Great, thanks. David?
Our website's www.evergreenreg.com. I'm on LinkedIn. We're on LinkedIn. As far as Instagram and Facebook and Snapchat, I don't know. It makes me feel old, but I don't know. We're probably on that stuff. I don't know. I don't pay any attention. I will say that I hear the happy hour for our team has already started. It's 5 o'clock in Chicago.
Okay.
So I think we probably should call it here.
Yep. All right. Thanks a lot. And Todd, I'll let you close things out. You started things. So
Yeah, you can reach me at lhbcorp.com, and that would be the best place to get a hold of me. And if you have any questions or comments, I'd certainly like to connect with you. So thank you.
great. Thanks a lot, everybody.
Thanks.
So for everybody that's still on the call, I want to remind you that if you'd like to get learning unit credits for this Think Tank presentation, you can email Justin Banda at jbanda@leggett.com with their name and AIA number to receive credit for attending today's event. Just a reminder that next week you'll be receiving a post-attendee packet that will include the panelists' suggestions for further reading, as well as ways to get in touch with them. I also want to remind everybody that there is a think tank competition. Registration is now open through November 7th. This is a design competition. Winners will be announced at the final think tank on November 12th. We're also running a competition to complement this year's think tank, Equalizing Everywhere, the global playground. Equalizing Everywhere is an ideas competition for designing the future of playful learning in communities around the world. For more information, please see the link that has been posted. Registration is currently open. And again, the winners will be announced on November 12th. So this is the second of 4 think tank events this fall. We have the last 2 think tank events happening on October 22nd and November 12th, focusing on transit and retail infrastructure and design for health and well-being, respectively. The next think tank event will be on October 22nd from 2 to 5 p.m. And Justin will put the link in the chat for you to register for that event. We'll be discussing transportation and municipal design, and that whole event will be hosted by Leggett's own Zach Campbell. So again, thank you to all the panelists, David Block, Stephen Ortego, Kevin Zepernick, Scott Farbman, and Todd Rhoades. And thank everybody who has attended as well. I also like to thank the think tank team, including Robin Randall, Ted Hogg, Sapita Asadi, Nicholas Woodard, Ross Jackson, Douglas Jody Boyce, Ann Tranter, and Patrick Brosnan. Okay, everybody, have a great weekend. Thanks a lot.